Good, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here this evening for the Monday, June 24th meeting of the Interstate 35 Board of Directors. We'll start off by doing a roll call and call to order. Nathan Gibson here.
Jessica Buckland here.
Melissa Keller here.
Monica Strange here.
Okay. Nick. All right. We'll do the Pledge of Allegiance real quick. All right, we'll review the Interstate 35 mission statement and district priorities. The mission statement: the Interstate 35 Community School District exists to develop lifelong learners and responsible, productive, successful citizens in an ever-changing society. Our district priorities are to articulate and support a cohesive, student-centered pre-K through 12 vision for continuous school improvement, engage in effective teaching and relevant learning for the 21st century, and operate with fiscal integrity, efficiency, and effectiveness. With that, we'll move to the first agenda item, which is discuss or approve the agenda. Is there any discussion on the agenda? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll second it.
It's been properly moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. The next agenda item, we're actually going to recess for about 10 minutes and go out to the main lunchroom area to recognize our retirees. I think we only have one that's able to attend today, so I'm eager to recognize and honor Ms. Megers for many years of service. So real quick before we recess, I'll pass it over to Dr. Dentlinger.
Thank you. I just wanted to say a couple words about Ms. Megers. I think the thing that as an educator is so unusual is being in a system for as long as you've been. I know that you and Denny both found a tremendous amount of family and support and satisfaction at I-35, which I think speaks volumes of the continued program that we've had here. And I think about the countless lives that you've touched and continue to touch as they go into the world and have children and think about education and what's important and what's of value. And those things are just invaluable. You can't identify, but I just want you to know from conversations I've had with multitude of people, your impact is far and wide. And for me, I appreciate the friendship. I appreciate the challenges, the support, pushing me to be better. And I think that I would speak for most of the staff, and I think they would say the same. So it's always an honor to recognize somebody who gets to retire and go to the next phase, and we're so excited for you. Hopefully you'll be in and around and in touch so we can know what the next chapter holds from you, but I just want to thank you for all you've done and wish you well in all that you're going to do.
All right, so with that, I'll entertain a motion to recess. Do we have to do a vote on this? I think we do. No? Okay, actually, I'll just take us into recess. Please, we welcome everyone to join us out in the lunchroom for some punch and cake, I think, and also we're going to say a few more words and honor Ms. Megers a little bit more while we're out there. So we'll be back in 10. All right. We are back from recess at 6:26, and we'll continue to move on with the agenda. Next, we have open forum. Residents, students, parents, guardians, and staff members of the district may address the board about relevant topics. Those who wish to speak must sign up at the beginning of the meeting. Speakers' participation is limited to 5 minutes per meeting. We ask that speakers remember that Iowa law prohibits board members from discussing specific employees, students, or their performance. I do not believe we had any sign-ups for today. Okay. That'll close open forum. We'll move to the students' representative support report, which I don't think.
Doesn't, oh, sorry.
Oh, during the
Summer, he usually doesn't.
Yeah, during the summer, student representative support report is not here. So we'll move on to the principal's report, and Ms. Woods.
Hi, everybody. I addressed a couple things on the report. One, I talked a little bit about 5th and 6th grade and working on kind of that maturity level of approach when it comes to behavior and our positive and negative reinforcement plan. And we were able to kind of send 2 teachers to a house system. So if you know anything about Harry Potter, it kind of breathes that, where kids are teamed up and they can earn points and lose points, and really gamify kind of the expectations around the building and really exemplify peer accountability through that process. And then kind of pairing that with the 7 habits and our staff's take on that to kind of make a holistic program for those 2 grades. So that's in the works. Conditions of learning came back. I'm very pleased. I don't know if you had a chance to look at that or not, but we are well above state average, continue to grow. We went down 1 percentage point in one of them, but it's at like 96%. So otherwise, that's looking really strong. Again, as we go into this school year, trying to tackle some of those things through the way we set up our goals. If you recall, our trusted adult goal of making sure every kid had one, making sure every kid had a trusted peer, making sure there was time for those people to interact. All of that leads back to the scores on this and the questions that are asked. So we've made significant growth over the last 2 years, and we'll continue to tackle those scores that are not as high as they could be. So I wanted to give a shout out. I haven't addressed perfect scores yet on ISASP, and wanted to shout out a couple students that had scored a perfect score on their writing assessment. So shout out to Lauren, Grant, Aiden, and Hayden. And just working on getting resituated, getting everything up and going for next school year. So any questions, thoughts, or concerns for me?
I just have a question about the Rockstar Camp. What's that
Yep.
about?
Oh, yeah. So Mrs. Duggar, I don't know if you've heard of her, but she's pretty awesome. She wants to get some more instruments, specifically some long xylophone-looking things. Pretty sure that's what they're called. But anyway, she kind of has her eyes on the prize, and one of the things she wanted to do is kind of engage kids in music and also find a way to build a little capacity to build or get some extra beyond, what would be normally possible. So that started today and goes through Thursday, and my girls went and seemed to have a blast today. So we'll see how the next 3 days go, but I'm sure it will be fantastic. So.
I just had a couple questions on the conditional learning survey. I did spend some time looking through that. One, is that a state mandated, I guess, survey that's sent out? Okay. Yep. And that, who I guess makes that survey?
Yep. Sharon, you want to cover that, or you want me to cover that? What do you want? I'll go wild.
It can be
Okay.
quick, I'm just
Okay.
curious, yeah.
Yep, so the state mandates that survey for every school district across the state and every school. It's administered from 3rd grade to 12th grade, correct, Adam? Annually. It does not fall under the state's rule of a survey compliance when getting parent signatures. It's a non-request, so every year you'll see a paper or an email come home that says, we're going to take this survey, please contact us if you do not want your child to take it. And then the scoring is kind of funky. I think Dr. Dentlinger shared about it a couple times. There's a kind of 5 clusters of questions. So one is like adult to student relationships. And there might be 5 or 6 questions in that section. And if a kid answers one of those undesirably, then that whole score is a negative score. So I always talk about this one. There's a question on there that says, the adults in my school care about me. And I remember the first time I was administering it here, I had a boisterous 3rd grade boy yell out, well, so-and-so doesn't care about me. And I was like, dude, like, hold on here. That's one adult on one occasion. You've got 100 adults that work here, and so they got to really understand what they're answering, because the questions come with scales like most of the time, sometimes, hardly
Likens
ever,
scale,
and it's hard for a 3rd grade mind or a 4th grade mind to even wrap around that. So there's a lot of teaching involved, and then a lot of targeting those specific questions to make sure that we're getting kids what they need to feel like they can answer those successfully. So,
Okay.
yeah.
And that just led to my second question. When I was going through it, I know you only went down 1% in that one area, but then as I was going through the details, the emotional safety, which, again, I have no context of
Right.
what questions they asked that
Yep.
led to that, but it shows, a positive 55 and a negative 45%
Yep.
on the emotional safety. And I was just like, what's that mean, and how did that relate to only a 1% drop?
Yep.
It was just,
Yep.
Danielle, isn't this the test where if they answer like no in a section like once or twice, it takes their whole section to
Correct.
no?
Correct. Like, so
Yeah.
when you look at those scores, the way that they're presented there, if one kid marks no on any of those 5 questions,
The whole thing.
they're now a negative score. They're now part of 49. So
Okay.
here's the questions that we need to work on in that section. So emotional safety, we scored 55%. That's up 34% from our previous year.
okay.
And the state average is 21%. So you gotta kind of keep that in context.
context,
But
yeah.
the 2 questions, and we talked, the same 2 questions I brought up last year that are part of how we're trying to operate. One is I was called names, made fun of, or picked on in a way that hurt my feelings. And the other one is, other students left me out on purpose or completely ignored me. Those are the 2 that seem to get us a lot.
That
Yep.
demerit,
Yep.
okay, all right.
So, obviously, those are targets, and I kind of listed those ones out as areas we're gonna try to
Yep.
tackle, but to be quite frank, 55% when you're asked a question of that nature to 3rd and 4th graders, it's tough, so, yep,
Yep, okay, thank you.
yep.
Any other
Anything
questions?
else? Awesome, thank you guys.
Thank you, Ms. Woods.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Beckel?
No music this time, I'm sorry. All right, so I do have our board, the handbook linked up top, but we're gonna review that later, so ignore that piece for now. But I've also got our conditions for learning for the high school. So up above, you'll see it says grades 6 through 12, but when you dig into the data, it's only grades 9 through 12. So it's only high school age students or 9th grade to 12th grade age students. So the first table is like the overall scores for each of the categories. Really pleased with what we're seeing here. We're seeing some good increases. This does play a part in our school report card. So when we get our report card, it's this, ISAS, and like attendance, stuff like that, behavior records. So it's always nice to see positive impact on our school report card. So then I break down each of the categories. The first line graph is our chart over the last few years. I apologize, my allergies are going nuts right now for some reason. And then right underneath that, you have a distribution graph where it shows like our comparison versus the state. So you can either set that as comparison to the state or to the local AEA, so people in our region, or you can do it towards the rest of the district. So you can kind of narrow that focus down. Each one of those is just comparison to the state where we fall. Then I highlighted some of the topics, like the questions that they asked. So like if you look at the student-to-student relationships, the categories are, do you have a trusted friend at school that you eat lunch with? Do students make you feel welcome? So these kind of paraphrased. Do students treat each other with respect? Do they respect each other's differences? So I highlighted that one because that's the one in that category where we had the most negative marks. So my plan here is to take this, talk about it with staff as we start setting goals for our next school year and try to figure out where we need to set some goals in this category. This usually kind of gets lumped in like climate, culture type goals. So each one of the different categories kind of broken down there for you. You can see where we've been over the last 4 years versus where we fell compared to the state this year. Student-to-student relationships, that one kind of surprises me. Our kids are kind of tight-knit, but I wonder sometimes it almost feels kind of cliquey to them, or they feel like they get pushed aside because of their differences. So that might be one that we kind of focus on next year. But I'll let you guys kind of look through the rest of those if you haven't checked those out. Do you have any questions for me about our Conditions for Learning survey?
I think some of mine are, similar, just more about how those questions, which I think both of you answered. One of the things I'd ask, if possible, going forward. So Ms. Woods had hers in a little bit different format and then an actual PDF to the report. I think yours were maybe the screenshots of the reports, or I couldn't tell if it was just sections or if it was the whole report. So if there's any possibility, just like in the future, these things for, especially if it's between elementary and high school, if it's kind of like the same thing, whether it be ISAS or this, if we had a similar format, because with that, I was able to see the raw report and I was able to go through and I think she highlighted some of the things just like you did. I just didn't have the full report to go back through. So that was the only request I had, that in the future, so.
Can do.
So I was looking at the students treat adults with respect was one of the lowest scores here that you had. Do you have like what grades that is, or is it all the way through the high school? Or
It's 9 through 12.
I know it's 9 through 12. I was just wondering if it was more freshmen, more.
You can click into it, dig into it, and you can see
Okay.
like the percent positive for each grade level.
Okay.
So we could actually dig into that a little bit more.
All right. Kind of had the same question on like the kids treating each other with respect also.
We might see difference in our grade levels, for sure.
That's what I was wondering. All right, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys, thank you.
Hey, Beckel, I don't know if you can answer this, but it would make sense as they get older. Is that a common trend with schools? Because I know you've been at a couple, where you see the elementary through middle to high school and the numbers going down
Yeah.
in all those areas? I'd imagine phone use.
That's been the trend I've seen at most of the districts. A lot of times when the kids are smaller, school's still a really fun place for them. And as they get older and older, they get more and more like ready to be out working, doing something different. You kind of see the independence kind of shows a little bit more, and school becomes a little bit more of a negative place for them. I know that sounds terrible, but we've got to shift that a little bit. It's harder to entertain the older kids when they've got other things on their mind, things they're wanting to do. And I also think that sometimes as kids get older, maybe the picking gets a little bit worse. I mean, maybe that peaks in middle school, I don't know, but everywhere I've been, that's kind of been the general trend.
Thank you, Mr. Beckel. Okay, I know Ms. Whitson's not here. She did have a report also with her conditions of learning. Survey was the primary thing, I think, that I saw in her report. I don't know if anybody was going to talk to that or if any board members just had any questions on that one. Yeah. Okay. No questions on that? All right, then we'll go to Mr. Weber.
All right, I'm going to try and make mine quick, and then I got to get back outside. So I highlighted in there baseball, softball, fantastic season so far. Hopefully going to be hosting a lot of games on both sides here for the postseason. And then I highlighted, I know it's not an actual item as I stand here, but I want to make sure if you have questions about the changes to the good conduct and the rollout to 7th and 8th grade, because we don't have anything for 7th and 8th grade currently, starting for next year, that you could ask me and I can answer, and then obviously you'll discuss it later in the meeting, but I won't be here. So is there any questions, comments? It's been something we've been working through for about 6 or 8 months with all the administrators. The last 2 years of data of more issues than we've probably seen, especially with like vapes, and not being able to not only have a appropriate consequence, but also a teaching tool, and that's what that good conduct does. It also has kind of a one-strike penalty, so it's not the exact same as the high school, where you get caught with something, that's your first offense. Middle school, you're gonna get that one, so let's say that's a day, OSS, whatever our matrix says, but then it allows me to then, and Mr. Beckel, Ms. Woods, depending on the grade level, to have that conversation with the family, with the student, say, hey, you're active in all these events. You know if you keep doing this, that's gonna really jeopardize the different things you're in, and use that as another hook to hopefully make good decisions. So as you look at it, is there any concerns, questions, comments on that piece of it?
I only had one question because it's unique and different this year in that we have the secondary from 7 to 12, and it states through their, career. So does that restart when they hit 9th grade, or are we, okay, so
I
7,
can go
8,
in, I can go in, and we've even talked over the last 2 years. There's another piece in that, even though it says career, that we changed a year ago, which allows for, if you go 2 full years without an incident, so something happened, let's say with a freshman, and all of a sudden their senior year, something silly, not a fight that got them arrested, not bringing drugs to school, but something that would have fallen into good conduct, is that really their second penalty or not? There is something that at the 2 years you're allowed to appeal that to be a first offense. But I think we would agree, and if it needs to be in black and white, I can put in there, I think once you start 9th grade, that's a separate, because that's there's a lot of state rules with that, association rules. 7, 8, it's not uniform anywhere. Everyone does their own thing. I just think it would be a good piece to add. So, yeah.
My questions are mainly around that appeals process, but I think we'll get into that when we discuss the handbook later. I did have questions on the fundraising activities. I didn't know if you were going to speak to that, or
I can,
you're
yeah.
done. It depends if you were going to or not. I can just ask the questions I had on it.
So what I've learned now coming into my 4th year at I-35 is that we have a million fundraisers, and 2 years ago it was made very clear to me, like, we have kids that are in 4 sports, and just talking activities now, and they're being asked to fundraise in every single one of those sports. Now, again, that was 2 years ago. And so the idea was, where else can we create funding revenue sources so we can start eliminating the fact that not only if my kid is in 4 sports and then also in marching band and also in this, or is part of Boy Scouts and has to do that cookie sale or whatever it is, that we're not just hitting up the same parent, the same family over and over and over again. And so we've been able to eliminate, I think it's 13 now, I don't have it in front of me, but just this last year fundraisers, while still supplementing everything that the programs need. So but those kids aren't having to go do that now. It doesn't mean that they're gonna go away completely. The football card is a big one. Mike and I, we can't get rid of that right now, because the biggest reason we do that is because we spend $6 to $8 grand every fall on safety measures. We have to recondition helmets, you have to have stay-alls on your shoulder pads, and we don't have that income right now. But that doesn't mean if I can get rid of the rest, that football player that's in 3 other sports now isn't doing that all of the time.
No.
And so the idea is, as long as we can keep the corporate side with what we have right now and the Road Runner wall going and growing, which we're in year 2, I encourage everyone to be on that wall, a few of you are. And you have a month now still to sign up. If we keep doing that, that's your one-stop shop. Mr. Downs jokes with me, he did it last year, and then the few people that did approach him about fundraisers, he's like, no, I gave my one time of $500, and that gets dispersed over everyone that needs it. And so then he did it for year 2, because he feels like if I do that one time, I don't need to worry about the $20 ones. And the more I remove from kids having to do that, then we shouldn't have that issue. And so it's not a negative impact. We're being able to fund everything that we want. So what questions do you have from that?
Yeah, so my question centered around, so first off, I think that makes sense, having been a parent that donates all of them as they come around. My concern is, what is the committee, or who is the person that decides where that money goes? Or I guess said otherwise, how do you make sure that 90% of the money doesn't go towards like the football program, and the band program only gets 5%? Sure. Like, who makes the decision on, if we're centralizing all this into one bucket, what's that entity, that person makes a decision on who gets the money and when?
So from the first step is that coach, sponsor, whoever, usually comes to me. They can go straight to the boosters too, because it's run through the I-35 boosters. Again, it's not going in an activity fund here at school, so it's going through the boosters. Most of them, so that they don't have to come attend all those meetings, bring that request to me. I then take it to our monthly meeting with the boosters, and the boosters then grant it or don't. They've never not granted it. And the funny thing now, and again, just coincidence that you use those two examples, it would be flipped. Football actually asked for the least, and band got a massive donations these past year to get all that stuff. And so I would say there isn't a sponsor or coach that's been told no, but it's also not 100% gift, right? Usually we're using activity funds to portion some of it, and the I-35 boosters are trying to always maintain that they can do 50%. And so sometimes it's bigger, sometimes it's smaller, but anything in my now 3 years, they've never told me no, but we've also gotten really creative on how we raise money so they don't have to, so.
The booster club, that's what I needed on
so
that. I
that's
didn't
the
know
group.
that's what was routing through this, so,
Yep.
okay, thank you.
Yep. Else? Because I can stay in the AC as long as you want. I'll stay here. That's all. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. Okay, now we'll move on to the superintendent report. Dr. Dentlinger?
Yes, so I just have a few things. We have the district results from the survey that was completed. This is through Leapsome, which is a survey company that gives us a lot of versatility in creating action steps and determining if we need to do follow-up surveys and just a mechanism to do that. So Jen Boffman has really kind of taken the lead on this, and this is a little unusual because we do have 2 surveys. We're not really sure what happened, but when we sent the first survey, we saw all the questions, and when it went to the public or the consumers that were going to take the survey, the questions we created were left off. So we did a follow-up survey, so we have 2. But I think she's worked through that, and that shouldn't happen again, as I understand it. So we might have to do another practice one just to make sure. But so what I did is I just took all of the kinds of questions, grouped them together, and put the results on here. This really is just an overview of what this does. I think that Mr. Grandin and Jen, really the whole administrative team, will have a lot of flexibility with this tool, which will be really, I think, beneficial. So the first page is the general information, and that's just kind of the question and what the score was. And it tells you out of how many. The mission statement, that was a very specific question that we had asked about what do you think is a value in our mission statement, or what should be a value in that mission statement, because I know that was one of the conversations with some of the board members, is if we're working on kind of modernizing that, since it's been a few years since that's been looked at. These are the kind of themes that came up. Now, I think it's always important to remember that this is staff, right? This isn't parents and community, so we'd have to send something out to them as well. That wouldn't go through Leapsome, because we only have this for our staff. But we could ask a similar question and send that out to parents. So you can see how it breaks down that information. There's a section there for goals. We had asked another question about what do you value, and where do we need to be for our students, and what goals are there, and you can kind of see what those broke down into. And then I had an examples of comments. So the question that I pulled out was, do I have the information to do my job? And there's just some feedback there. So again, you can get into each of those questions and get feedback. You can get into each of those questions and look at it by department, which is the last example. Oops. Yeah, the last example. I feel comfortable addressing my concerns with my administrative team. I didn't include all of those categories because if there's numbers less than, we try and leave those off because we don't want to pull any one person out, or some cases we had 3 people in a department answer. So we don't want to do that. That'll be information that Mr. Grandin and the director can work through and kind of make goals around that data more specific, but I don't know that we would share that publicly just because the number is so small. Just like we do with testing. We don't have a group that has more than 10, we don't share the data. So I just wanted to give you an overview of what that looks like, but I also wanted to talk a little bit about how we've already taken some of this information and moved it. So if you're on that general information tab, if you look at the very bottom of each one, it says most recent survey comment was engagement. So that was the thing that both sets of questions kind of pulled out as areas to pay attention to. So the administrative team, and we were lucky that Mr. Grandin was there that day, work through what we would recommend as the district goal for next year, and that doesn't include now engagement because of this survey. So you can see how we took this information really at a high level for that process, but talked about how do we make this something that we're doing. And so the administrative team has been building their professional learning, their PD calendar around not only core curriculum and culture, but also how are we doing with engagement. And so when you heard Mr. Beckel talk about engaging students at that high school, middle school level, those are things we're going to be really targeting, or at least the school's going to be really targeting this next year. So you can see how we've taken that data and moved it to some actionable agenda things that they're going to put into the PD calendar and then to the goal. So I just wanted to show you that's an example of how we think this is a real value.
Quick question.
Yeah, I would say questions about this
Yeah.
piece, yeah.
So would that be something that we could maybe see in August or September? I know August is going to be crazy, but maybe September, just not every single action item, but just an overall, how are you taking engagement and the data, and what are the action items, behind that? And it can be high level. I would love to see.
I would assume that's part of the plan, Mr. Grandin.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, yep.
Yeah.
I
mean, because this gives us
assumed it
the
was
tool
too.
to do that. Yeah, this gives the tool to do that pretty quickly. And it does come up, you can actually develop action plans around this. Some of them are suggested. So some of these questions came from the company. Some of them we created based on what we wanted to find out from our district. And so if it came from the company, it does come with some actionable things, which we can modify, change to make it specific to what we want it to be. And then it's a matter of how often are we assessing that? What are we using? Is it the administrators? Are we sending another survey? Are we asking directors to give us feedback? So there could be any number of ways that comes to you, but I anticipate that's part of the process. That'll happen now that we have some real tangible things.
Yeah, I think it's, excuse me, I think it's just helpful for, the staff to know the why behind, why did we ask for this, and the action items, just outlining that's going to be helpful, that it wasn't just the board wanting to get this information or, get a temperature check. It was really to put some action items in place, so thank you.
And I think it's going to be really valuable for that process, so.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, Melissa and the rest of the members of the board, I think it's not just, for the administration team also to use in their planning. I think when we talk about our working sessions and setting good governance strategy and goals, this was meant to be an input into, us as well as we evaluate and make decisions. So, one of the things for me, and when we talked about this, when we approved LEAP Sum, we want to work with the superintendent and the administration to understand, what changes need to be made to policy, to process, to procedure, whatever, and help us facilitate some of this culture transformation as well. So I'm eager, and I thank everyone who took the time to fill out this survey. I spent a lot of time reading it, and I'm eager to spend a lot more time talking with Mr. Grandin about it and understanding it more, because I think, these questions and the responses give us a smell test of areas, but really trying to understand, okay, what levers can we pull, what can we do differently to increase some of these scores, and what scores are important, what are the most important, because we can't hit all of these, right? So that's what I look forward to working with Mr. Grandin on it to figure out. So thank you, and thank you for the readout.
Yeah, absolutely, and yeah, thank you for talking about that, because on row 24, you can see, the score
Yep.
For the board. I mean, that speaks volumes, so
Yep.
recognizing that and putting some action items behind that during our work session is going to be very, very important, so.
Yep.
Yeah, I do think the other thing with this, whenever you get data, it is whatever you make of it, right?
Yeah.
Like anything, we can look at a piece of data and be like, well, it didn't tell us this or it didn't tell us that. We know that. But I think you have to have a starting point for a lot of conversations, and this, I think, gives that communication between the board and the teachers and the staff.
Yep.
When you look at the percentage of people who filled the survey out, that was really impressive, right?
Yep.
I mean, we were in the 60s on both surveys, 60%. And I think that as long as you start to make those things actionable, and that's kind of the process that I would always use to say, okay, here's what we asked, here's what the things are that we did as a result, whether it was a roundtable that we had or whether we sent out a survey and we were changing PD. So that process isn't new, but I'm just pleased that they use this mechanism to do that. So I think it's got a lot of potential for growth here, so. The transition, I just want to talk briefly. I have had an opportunity to visit with Mr. Grandin a couple of times. And so I did put the district goal on there because that's really the overarching thing that we're really working on so that the planning can work for next fall. So that does include the change there. We also have the facilities update. And so I did ask, I had a couple of questions about the roof project. We had some water in the kitchen office area, and so I wanted to get Mr. Gray here so he could explain that. We did about maybe in March, have a conversation about air conditioning, and I want to give an update on where we are with that, both the rest of the high school rooms and also we did have a specific question about the kitchen area. So Mr. Garrett Argenbright is also here from DCI, so I'll let Garrett go first. And he can give us an update on the project, if you guys are okay with that, what's going on and where we are. So if you want to take us in the first part of this conversation.
Yeah, I'll just give you a quick update on both projects, and then if you've got questions, I'll answer them best I can. If I don't have the answer, I'll get back to you. But so we've got the science lab and the baseball field. Science lab demolition work is complete in there, and we're starting to build back with framing. You'll see flooring going in shortly. Painting will go up. We got casework is scheduled for late July, so we'll get that right as we expected. So we're in good shape to have that back up and open for the start of the school year. Get you guys moved in and those 2 new classrooms ready for you guys. Baseball, softball fields. We're moving along well, considering the rain we had in May. It was not very good, and it really hurt our productivity on site. There would be you get a day where it was dry and then it'd rain the next day. So we are behind on schedule-wise when you look at the fields in regards to the seeding of the outfields and then the sod on the practice field. We are taking steps to be ready for that here in the next couple weeks. Everything else there, we are on site, or on schedule. We've got block just delivered for the concession stands and the dugouts, so you'll start seeing those going vertical here shortly. And then we've got bleachers and the press box. We got a date of October for that. That was our long lead time item. We were waiting to confirm delivery date, and we were just told October here a couple weeks ago. So that one's looking like we'll be on schedule for that at the end of November for a substantial completion date.
So, and I apologize if it takes you off guard. I was given some kind of information on the fly, and I didn't get an opportunity to talk with Dr. Dentling or others about it. And maybe you can't answer this, did we cut some fiber that's going to the CTE building, and what's the ETA
Yes.
on getting that fixed? And then my second question is, has the greenhouse building that we have been without water for some period of time as well, and do we know when that's going back on?
So I can answer both of those, and I will follow up with more detailed information later on this week. But yes, the fiber line was hit. There's a private line from the school to the CTE building that was hit when we were digging in our sanitary line. So we've been on the phone with some people trying to get a ETA on how quickly we can get that taken care of. We struck out with our first route we were going, so we geared up and asked somebody else. So our project superintendent should have an answer on that tomorrow. He didn't have it today when we talked, but they're working on getting a solution for that, so I can let you guys know when that'll be back up and running.
Okay, and I assume we aren't going to have to pay for that?
That's to be determined. So
Okay.
yeah, it was.
I won't have that conversation now, but if somebody cut fiber, I know to call, what is it, 811 or whatever,
Yeah,
before
so
I
that's-
dig, but anyways, yeah.
Yep, that's what we're looking into. From our understanding, the contractor called in his locates. We're waiting on confirmation for that ticket from him. This is a private utility, so we're trying to figure out how exactly that, when they called in their locates to 811,
Okay.
how that got relayed to the school. So
Okay.
we are looking into that, and there will be further discussion on that.
Okay. And I apologize, one follow-up question, I'll pass it to you, I know you want to say. I assume we have stuff growing in that greenhouse? Are we
So-
doing anything to help them make sure they got water for it all?
The greenhouse, we did cut water off there for a little bit, just as part of we have utilities running north and south there from the existing school up there. But we have turned water back on. Talking with Rick, it's not to full pressure. So we are doing some investigating on what happened, if there's a kink in the line as we're working. But as far as I know, there is water there. I don't think there's anything growing in the greenhouse at the moment, but there is water in there right now, so.
Mr. Magers, I don't see him in here anymore, he must have left, but okay, all right, thank you, Dan.
What's the duration of the block work, like the time frame? What are you guys thinking?
Well, if I can look on the schedule quickly, now, I wanted to say about 3 weeks, but I'm not sure so they've got, we've got block work at both backstops and dugouts at both fields, and then the concessions building. We were scheduled to start June 25th, which is right on schedule. Trying to find an end date for block. Looks like about a week per field, and then a week for the concessions building.
Okay.
So about 3 to 4 weeks, block should be all up.
And then when are you guys setting steel on top for the decking?
When?
Yeah.
It'd be right after that, yeah.
Immediately following.
Yeah, I think the plan is to set the bearing walls in the concessions building first. We are waiting on some underground utility MEP under slab rough-in.
Yep.
That'll be going on here over the next couple of weeks. We'll set the bearing walls, and then we'll probably pour the slab and then drop in the joist, and then set up all the interior CME walls.
Okay, no, that's perfect. And then who did we procure the sod from? When they did their submittal, who'd they get it from?
I would have to double check. It's a couple layers. I know the contract was awarded to DDVI Group. Their subcontractor is Iowa Sports Turf. I'm not sure where their sod is coming
Okay.
from, but I can look that up here quick and send you guys a quick email.
All right, and then is it on the contractor, because we're deciding to seed in the time frame where I know we have irrigation and everything else, but I know normally SUDA states that it's 21 days of watering, like, we've got them on the hook for,
Yes,
since we're doing it out of date.
yes. For the sod, it was always written out in the bidding documents, and now in their contract, they're responsible for 28 days after the sod is laid to water it and maintain it.
Okay.
After that 28 days, it'll be turned over to the school.
But most of our stuff, we have irrigation in the
We-
areas that we're seeding early.
Yes, and the baseball and softball outfields are fully irrigated.
Okay.
And yeah, when that gets seeded, for the outfields, the contractor is responsible to maintain that until substantial completion. So we understand we're outside of the seeding window there due to the weather. We've talked with the engineer. He's recommended we still move forward with that seeding, with the irrigation there. We might get lucky, catch a break in the weather. We've always had planned to overseed in the fall. So we'll get another chance in the fall to hit that seeding window and make sure it's ready to go for spring.
And on the sod, you're 28 days or
28.
rooted. It's got to be rooting.
It should be rooted, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it should be, but it was
All right.
written as 28 days. I'll double check if the engineer threw it rooted there in the
Okay.
spec sections, but 28 days for sure.
All right, thank you, Garrett.
Yep.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
When was this picture taken?
Oh, I want to say that was a week ago, maybe?
Oh, awesome. I drove
Yeah.
back there and I couldn't see any of like the ball field and I'm like, oh my goodness, it is there.
Yeah, it's there, I know. You can see,
So-
all you can see is really the backstop poles sticking up, but yeah, we've got some good drone footage, and we'll continue to update that probably every couple of weeks, so we really see good progression.
Yeah, I'd love to see if we could share that on the Facebook page or
Yeah.
social media, because I think it just builds up the momentum and the excitement and, Yeah.
Yeah, let me know if you guys need, I shared a link with you. If
Yeah.
you need something more than that, let me know, and we'll be happy to share that with you.
yeah, thank you.
Definitely.
Okay.
Thank you, Garrett.
Thank you.
So we also had Mr. Gray. You awake back there? So just as a recap, I don't know if everybody that's in the audience was at our board meeting when some of this was approved, but we do have the roof project the main part of the roof that goes between the two buildings is up for replacement this summer. That was approved. We also have Mr. Gray here to give us an update on the summer work. There's a couple of concrete areas that we're doing this summer. There's a couple of room remodels in addition to, or room updates in addition to the science rooms. Remember, we're doing air conditioning in 4 of those rooms kind of around the corner there. I wanted to give a quick update on the air conditioning for the high school. I did visit with Mr. Grandin briefly about this, and I will get him an update more specific because we're starting to get numbers in. And I think it's important to remember that the project for the elementary and the middle school was all air conditioning. The high school, we're also replacing the heating because that's original to 1979, 80, 81 timeframe. So it is costing more, but we're also replacing all the heating elements as well, or units. So we have, I think we counted 16 rooms left. The equipment and the heating and the cooling equipment will be about $352,000 for those 16 rooms.
Right.
We do have a 480.
We need to run a line of 480 down to hook up all that AC, that unit in the
And right now it's in the gym.
upstairs in the gym. We're fed out of the pad on the west side of the building.
So we have to get the bid or the quote for
Yeah, and
that.
that's not included. They was going to try to get a hold of me today, this afternoon for this to give us that, but haven't received anything yet.
And then the other thing is that doesn't include the electrical work to hook these up in those
Right.
rooms. So we know that there's a little bit more cost to this. As we talked about, when we talked about the facilities planning back in December or January, we have earmarked money for this. And so the way we've done it with the middle school is we gave the contract last summer, and they had all school year to come in. And so they were here for Christmas break, they were here for spring break, and so those are all, I think, close to being operational now.
Right.
And then I would recommend maybe considering doing, I'm not gonna tell Chad what to do, but I would recommend kind of the same process so that those contractors have a little extra time. But that could be something that might be completed by next summer, which was the timeline we talked about. So that does not currently include the kitchen. We have talked about that there is access. There was a question about a duct.
There's a question about a duct, because the high school kitchen was remodeled. And so when they remodeled it, the office and the kitchen was actually just inside the wall of that main center hallway. Now it's clear at the east end of the kitchen. So when they did the remodeling, they just plugged that line. And it could be ran, you just get some flexible duct, stick on there, run across the ceiling, and we could get that air conditioned.
But it would only be the office.
It would only be the office, not
We don't
the
have
whole-
enough capacity to do the whole kitchen yet. So we did talk to Travis, mechanical, Bryce Travis, and had him give us some ideas for, is it possible then to do air conditioning in the kitchen? Our first priority is obviously the classroom, so we'll work on that. But come next summer, now the conversation is from some of these outlying areas that need to still have air conditioning. And so he gave us an idea of a couple of different ways we could go about it. I didn't ask for more than that. I know it's possible, but I didn't ask for more than that because it's going to be a year before we even start to have the conversation. So if you want more specific information around that, I can definitely get it. It is possible, but it will be, what he told us could be between $400,000 and $500,000 for the kitchen. So we just have to make sure it's planned for. But I wanted to give an update on both of those because they were questions that have been asked over the last couple of months.
Yeah, air conditioning for a kitchen with all the elements and the stuff in there, it's a whole different animal than just air conditioning an office or a classroom and stuff. Because with the hood, you got your fresh air, you have to chill it. And after that, then you got to figure out what kind of unit you're going to put in. And Bryce was just shooting me, he says, I'm just shooting kind of from the hip. But he was looking, he felt that it should be at least an 8 to 10 ton unit. Is that going to be a roof unit, or are we going to go, something on the ground? So it's a whole I mean, there's a lot to it, because you're more or less having to chill two things. You chill your cold air, your fresh air coming in off the hood. Also, you got to chill up the room itself.
So first off, thank you, Rick. Thank you, Dr. Dentlinger, for bringing this. Unlike my esteemed colleague over here, I don't understand a lot of that 10-ton, all that stuff. Like, I have to defer to Dan and learn from him on this. But I think, so we said 17 rooms, you said? 16 rooms, right? And back in January, I think it was, when we had this conversation, obviously getting those kids, the classrooms where learning is engaged, for me at least, is a priority. But also, like, just barely under that are our staff that are in there cooking for our kids and making sure that they have the food that they need to, be engaged in the learning, right? These things are part and parcel to each other. And one of the things I would just ask, I guess, for the administration for me is, and I think that, sorry, let me back up. Their comfort and welfare is important to me as well. I think the other thing is you also run into a situation where, especially with leaky roofs, I mean, the food's in there. Like, this is food that we're feeding our kids, right? So making sure the atmosphere and the environment where the food is cooked for our kids has the best possible cleanliness and proactive measures to keep mold out of there and all that. Those are the things that I worry about. And I understand this is hard. We got to make a lot of priority decisions. And I think one of the things I was just asking Dr. Dentlinger, and why I think you're here today, is what are our options to be scrappy in the interim? Like, I'd heard about this duck thing back in January. I didn't know if that ever got investigated or looked into, and if it's possible, if we can get them one room where they can step into and cool down for a minute, before they get off. What's that look like? Like, can we do that? Can we entertain that while we're trying to figure out the larger strategic thing? Yeah. My other question, sorry, about the roof, I'd heard that there was some flooding, that was happening, and I knew that we had approved a bid to replace the roof.
I wanted to make sure that we got 4 sections. Ed Green was here early this week, doing some more measurements to get the stuff ordered, because he said he'd called me the week before and said, "We're caught up, you're next, and I want to know which roof you want me to start with," and we met.
So it will fix the roof for that kitchen area, the part of the bid that we
and
approved.
Matt, my maintenance guy, Matt, he'd been up there, he'd found a tear in part of that roof that's going to be replaced.
Okay.
And that's what's leaking in the kitchen. He's got that patched,
Okay.
but that's all going to be ripped off and fixed
redone by Ed? Okay,
by Ed.
perfect. So the roof issue's getting taken care of. That's what I just wanted to
Right.
validate. And then I think the next thing is we still need to have, larger strategic discussions on funding and figuring out what our options are for getting an air conditioning in there. I guess my third question is, it sounds like there's options maybe we could do to provide some relief, at least to a room in that building.
Yeah, we can run flexible duct and get that office done. That's minimal. I mean, it's nothing, it's a couple boxes of.
And obviously, I would leave it to Mr. Grandin to talk, but that's just my ask is, just figuring out what are some of the scrappy things we can do to provide some relief. At least it's a reprieve that somebody who's standing on the dishwasher for 3 hours, they have a place to walk in that's super chilled, right? To allow them to, rather than the refrigerator or the freezer,
Well,
So,
so I even talked to Bryce, and I said, what about, the student center, they got the doors there, is there a way we can open them up? And he said, the roof unit that chills that is not sized enough to take that on. You'll end up overdoing it, and you're going to condensation. That's where you're going to get your moisture in the ceiling, your mold problems and stuff. So he said, that's definitely not. You don't want to.
Yeah. Okay. So when can we start expecting to see for this board some proposals that we can look at and potentially approve for the longer plan?
So I think that's part of that facilities, the long-range facilities plan. So I know that I visited with Mr. Grandin about that, and I anticipate that'll be something that he's getting going and getting this summer. I mean, it's one of those ongoing, because remember, for a while, we didn't see anything. So if you think about those phases that we talked about, if you're talking about a $500,000 project, my thought process is, does that fit into a phase somewhere? You know, because that's what you're talking, I mean, that's a nice chunk of money that you're gonna need to allocate or reserve for that. So I think that as that process takes place, that becomes part of the conversation. We know we have the Prairie on there. We know we have the air conditioning for at least the office to start with, but long-term, the kitchen. We know we have air conditioning for the gym. All of those things are, the air conditioning in the cafeteria was not on that, but that to me is an add, so you can get more specific information about what that would cost. Because right now we just said, is it even possible? So after we had our meeting in January, that's what our conversation was with Mr. Travis, is this even possible? And that's when he said, you have a couple of options. But we knew it was gonna be not immediate, so that's why we didn't ask him to draw anything up yet. But I think that becomes a part of your facilities plan. So I think Mr. Grandin's right on that. I think he's got a good handle on where we are with that and kind of how he's gonna bring a lot of experience around that. So I think that that'll hit the ground running. But again, I'm not gonna speak for him, but I just sense that from having conversations.
And I think for me, as we dive into this facilities plans, those are the conversations I want to have. I don't know if it's a working session, but, you know, this is what I'm trying to wrap my head around. That facilities plan, when I look at it, has the football field stuff. It has all of that. And it's not that that stuff isn't important for me, but, I mean, we got cooks in a kitchen cooking food for our kids without air conditioning. Like, we need to have those conversations around priorities and working with Mr. Grandin on it. So anyways, thank you for coming. I would ask just, you know, Mr. Grandin and the rest, do what we can to find some reprieve for them. I mean, it's hot, you know, and yeah, get a dishwasher going, it's even hotter in there. So in the meantime, I look forward to having the conversations with my colleagues and Mr. Grandin on the facilities plan. Dan?
1 second, Rick. Where are we at with the concrete patching and everything?
Concrete patching, I got a hold of Stromax earlier this week, and Carmen's got that on their list to get Steve here. Noticed here past couple weeks that we had a blowout up front of the elementary, so I've got it marked off, painted, so nobody dives into that. But from what I've been talking to them, they said there's been a lot of that this year.
Okay.
So, but yeah, they're on schedule to.
I mean, they're just gonna get it done this summer, right before school starts.
Yeah, they said they'll have it done before school.
Not a big deal there. And you said Ed was here making a material list and everything else.
Yeah.
You said he was getting opened up in his schedule. Do you kind of anticipate when?
He got loaded up, and I think had to do with the weather too, rain and stuff like that. And he called last week and he said, "Hey, I'll be there Monday, and I want to go on the roof. I want to see what's underneath the ceiling, so we're not putting screws in the conduit," which has happened before, but but he wanted to check it out before they got too far into that.
Awesome.
So,
Thanks, Rick.
You bet.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
The only other thing I wanted to mention, and this is just a reminder, I don't know if a lot of our constituents are paying attention to what's on the news, but open enrollment has changed. If you remember, we had a break when you could open enroll at any time during the school year. Whether they're doing away with that. And so I think June 1st is the deadline. So if you want to open enroll, you need to do so by June 1st. And then it'll go back to the same process that we used in the past so that schools can better prepare based on numbers. So I believe the open enrollment date will stay March 1st. For the next school year, but because it came later, it's June 1st this year. And a reminder that kindergarten can open enroll through September 1st. So their open enrollment date is a little bit later. So I will make sure that Mrs. Woods gets that out on her information and then on Facebook. But that did make a change, so just so parents know that if they're considering bringing their kiddos to I-35, they need to make sure they get that done by June 1st. I'm sorry, July 1st. I kept saying June, July 1st.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Dentlinger, for superintendent's report. Next, we have discuss and approve the consent items. We have the past meeting minutes, monthly bills and financial statements, and then resignations and contracts. Nathan Kittrell hired as secondary music teacher. Josh Maxwell hired as co-head coach for cross country, and Kelsey Stonehawker hired as co-head coach for cross country. And then we had the open enrollment form that you all should have had access to. So is there discussion on the consent items? So I had a couple things real quick. So first off, I don't know if you guys noticed the past meeting minutes format has changed, and I think that was positive. Thank you, April. I assume you worked on doing that. So I personally found them easier to read. So thank you for that. Monthly bills and financial statements. I had a question on a couple things. One, I saw a lot of open enrollment checks going out on our stuff, but I didn't see anything coming in. And I know we have people that have open enrolled into I-35. So are we just at a phase right now where we're paying out, but we're not getting any in?
I got the bills ready to go out tomorrow. So then we'll do a receivable and they'll still be accounted for this fiscal year.
Okay, so you send the bills out to them and then
Yep.
they remit to you? Okay,
Yep.
all right, yeah. That should have just saw the big numbers coming in. I was like, I know there's some that are rolling in. Okay,
And you don't necessarily see the deposits
Okay.
when they pay us, so.
yeah.
But yeah, it'll be in.
Okay. And then also, and I think I brought this up in the last meeting, and maybe you're still working on it, I saw these big bills for the General Bank of Montreal or something, and if I remember correctly, you're saying it was a credit card or something that we were using, and one of our discussion items where we're gonna kind of break that up and itemize it. I don't think it has to be down to the dollar, but I just, it's hard to see. Those are huge bills that are going out and not understanding what's being bought with it. I feel I would like to, understand that as I approve these things, so.
Yep, and we can do some sort of an itemize out on that, and then you can see through nutrition, student athletics, and then mostly general fund to see how it's kind of split out too.
Thank you. All right, is there any other discussion?
I was just gonna ask if you have any information that you could share on the new music teacher? Like, his history, has he?
Second-year teacher, coming to us from a private school. Seems very energetic. Yeah, glad to get it.
All right. Seeing no further discussion, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent items.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent items.
Been properly moved. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Been properly moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. All right. Next, I apologize. I did have one question on the open enrollment form. It didn't change my vote, but I saw we had an open enrollment come in from Orient Maxburg, and obviously I don't know if people are paying attention to that school. It's closing down. Do we anticipate more coming in from there, or do we know?
We're
Okay.
not the contiguous school, so I doubt
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
but we might.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
If parents are coming through this way to go to work or, what
Yeah.
I mean, but because
Yeah.
we're not a neighboring school, I doubt we'll see many.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right. All right, next we have items for discussion, and I'll go through each one of these, and I think we'll come back through and have discussions on them. So the first thing is the handbook approval, which is action. We have the secondary handbook, the elementary handbook, the athletic activities handbook, certified staff handbook, and non-certified staff handbook. Update to the technology usage agreement. And then we have an exit interview recap. That is not an action item. Then we have school fees, which is an action item, and then garbage and pest control bids. So we'll go up to the items for discussion, and we'll start with the secondary handbook. Is there discussion?
So I'll give a little bit of background if that's okay. So I think that Mr. Beckel went through and highlighted the sections that were being changed. This is obviously the process we use every school year, so if you have questions about that, let us know. I know there's been a lot of conversation around SRG, and I feel really good about the process that we used for that. Since we've had this published for about 3 months on the board agenda, we've not had any feedback from parents about questions, and I think I've addressed all the questions from the board. So I think Mr. Beckel can talk to what the committee kind of worked through, and if there's other specific questions around. I know there's information there about truancy, because that law changed. There's information in there about some changes to the behavior list of offenses, 1, 2, 3, 4. We talked about that. So there's a few things that we've worked through over the course of the semester, or even last semester, that I think are reflected in there. So any conversations around those, we'd entertain.
It's got to be on the mic to be on the recording.
Yeah, you'll have to go to the mic. If anybody has a specific question, for Ms. Beckel as we discuss this item. Or Mr. Beckel, did you have anything you wanted to talk with us about before we started our discussion on this?
Well, just so you guys know, everything that's highlighted yellow is stuff that's being removed, and things that are green are things that are being added. So it's kind of color coded through there. One of the main focuses, the chain of command and appeals. There's been some just verbiage update there just to try to clarify some of that process. How do you guys want? Do you want to just like look through it and then ask questions, or?
I don't know about my colleagues. I've spent an enormous amount of time reading over this, not just, I think, in the last 3 or 4 days since it was published, but also engaged in several aspects of it. And I think, and we've had this conversation, I guess we'll dive right in, and I'll start on from my side. I think there's some positive movements in this area. There are still some things I have, I guess, questions on and some concerns on. We'll start with the appeals process that we talked about, earlier this year. I think it makes absolute sense, the changes that we made for the various levels of offenses. Some of them, kind of stop at the superintendent and don't make its way to the board. For those that, are offenses that just result in, in-school suspension, or
Right.
I think it was up to 1 or 2 days out of school. And then once it got to a larger out-of-school suspension, then you have that appeals process escalated to the board.
Right.
I think that makes sense to me, with one exception, as I was reading through this. And it's hard to put it into words other than to give you, a scenario. If I believe that I was wrongly ruled against by an administrator, and I have an appeals process that goes through, it's difficult for me to understand our statement that the sentence has to be served during that appeals process. Now, there are some exceptions. If somebody threatens harm to another student, if there's an act of violence, without a question, right? I think that at that point you have to do the right thing to protect the safety of others. But I'm still having trouble wrapping my head around if a parent, feels that they want to appeal the process, but let's say that process is a 4-day suspension is what they got, and they can't get through the appeals process for a week and a half. Why have the appeals process if the sentence has already been served?
So just something I want you to consider there.
Yeah. Yep.
Anything from 0 to 4 days is just appealed to the superintendent.
Yep.
So if it's something like that can be done in a matter of 24 to 48 hours. Okay, that should be done quickly. And that's why we have it stopped there, because if there is something that needs to go through a board approval, that's usually a bigger thing.
Yep.
And usually if you think about something that's gonna land a student out of school for 5 days or more, those are gonna be things like drugs, alcohol, fights, violence. And you don't want those students in activities in any way.
Agreed.
Okay. If it's something that is maybe questionable, it's likely not going to make it to that stage. You know what I mean? So if there's something where it's like, I don't understand why this is happening, that's likely going to stop with the superintendent. They're going to be like, no, you need to overturn this. This person's eligible. Okay. So I'm just saying, like, it's usually if it's 5 days out, there's a pretty substantiated situation that's happened. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So we don't want those kids or that individual representing a team or being part of something that's extracurricular if they've done something that's to that level.
Warranted to that
Now,
level.
I'm not one of those people that wants to write a kid off. Trust me, I'd rather put my arm around them, build it back. But it's just kind of the consequence of usually very poor choices for something that's that high, that many days out.
Yep.
So the asterisk is below all of that, so does that need to reflect that that's number 2?
I would say that's for both 1 and 2.
Okay,
If you guys would rather that it just reflect number 2, it can. Kind of like what I was saying, that number 1 is usually going to be done within 24 to 48 hours. If it is something that, let's say we can't get to the superintendent that day because they're out of town at a meeting or something's going, they're not necessarily reachable. In my opinion, it's fair that that person, if they had a game that night, probably should sit out until we can get to the superintendent. But if it's something like a 3-day suspension, then I don't know. That'd just be my stance on it.
I think it's important because we've had 2 or 3 since I've been here that have come to the superintendent, and I've addressed them all within 24 hours. And I mean, not counting a weekend, right, but a school day. So if a student were to sit out on a Thursday, it was addressed by Friday if it happened on Thursday. So it's always a real quick turnaround for those because we know there's a value in that process. So if they've shown that they should be a part of that and it's not at the consequence that the administrator determined, and I choose to think of that differently, it is a very quick turnaround. So that I don't think would be an issue.
And I would kind of argue that as a former coach, that my athletes or whoever it is that's representing the school had better not be in the office in the first place.
I think I understand that. This is more around, if I'm a parent and an administrator just gave my child a 5-day out-of-school suspension, and I feel that it was unjustified, and I as a parent want to appeal that process, what's the point of me of appealing that process if my kid has to serve it by the time I can get in front of the board? That's what I'm trying to wrap my head around. It's not necessarily coach or the kid, but it's more about the parent in this situation.
Again, I'd kind of argue.
And I don't know the answer
Reflect
because you're
back
right.
on what items would land a kid.
You're
in a
right.
5-day
If
suspension.
a kid threatens somebody else, those types of things, absolutely. And that's what I was trying to, as I read through it, is that the only scenario? Like, you're right. If a kid threatens somebody else, you're not waiting for the appeals process. Like, I think we all get that. But I'm reflecting on the scenario that happened this year, where a student got the out-of-school suspension, and the parent appealed it, but by the time they got to us, the out-of-school suspension had already been served, and that was not a threat, to another student.
I would like to point out that the law was broken in that situation too.
Agreed.
So that's tough to argue that one.
I know, but
I think the challenge, you and I have visited about this, Mr. Gibson, and I understand where you're coming from. I think the challenge we have is that every punitive system in our country is established the same way. You say you're innocent and you want to appeal your conviction, you're still in jail.
Well, you and I talked about it, unless you post bond or you're out on your own recognizance,
but
right?
if you're found guilty, right, you're in jail. So you've had a trial. So let's say that they talk to the superintendent, and I'd like to think that every level has a different lens that they're looking through. So Mr. Beckel is looking at it through the lens of the handbook. He's looking at it through the lens of good conduct. He's looking at those aspects. How am I being consistent in how I'm delivering this punishment or this consequent? How am I being fair to this student given circumstances or considerations? That's the lens he's looking at. I'm looking at it from the lens of, okay, as a parent, as a student, as an education program, as all of those things are now what I'm looking at to say, did this consequence fall in line with what would be reasonable? And if that's true, then that becomes, yes, I'm going to uphold it, or no, I'm going to reverse it, and you're going to be able to play tomorrow, whatever. I think we all look at it from different lenses. When it comes to you, you're looking at it from a different lens, and that's kind of why that process, I think, is built that way. But the system works because the people that are coming to you, the students that are going to come to you, are the people who are bringing drugs to school that might be selling. They're people that are probably up for expulsion. They're the people that are aggravated assault. All of that is going to come to you. I think we have to be very careful with saying we're gonna take what the administrative team, the principal, the superintendent, and say the parent supersedes that in the process, which is what I think this is kind of lending to. And I get the frustration because sometimes that's part of the you want your kids to be successful. You want to advocate for them. You want them to be as involved as possible. And for some kids, that's going to be the thing that they need, is to be in that activity or that sport or whatever it is. Those are all things that we take into consideration. But I think what we're talking about is those that are not dealt with in a 24, and I'm not going to speak for Mr. Grandin, but a 48-hour period are going to be those that are going to be handled pretty quickly. The other ones that come to you are way more severe. And so I just think we have to be careful with how are we going to disrupt the process for a few that are at a severe level, and how's that going to impact the ones that we deal with every day. So just something to think about.
Okay, so I just had a couple of questions for you, Beckel, real quick. It says for all level 1 through 3 events. So all level 1 through 3 events. And then on the number 2 line here, it says all level 3 and 4 events. So I'm going to guess that the reason we did that is it just depends on what the punishment actually ends up
Right,
being.
it doesn't say all
on.
level 3, it just says for level 3.
Yeah,
Because there's a
4
little
level,
bit of blur in there.
4.
Because there's some level 3 events, it might be a 5-day suspension.
Yep.
Just because if you look at the way we laid out levels 1, 2, 3, 4, the higher end of the level 3 events
Could get you there.
Yeah, it could get you there.
No, and I just wanted to clarify, that was my main thing.
Yeah.
The
So
other thing,
the word all there's not before level 3. So for some level 3 and then level 4s.
the other thing I will say is, me sitting on the board, in my opinion, I put my trust in the administration to make the judgment calls on some of this stuff.
Thanks, Dave.
Like, that way, the 5+ days, like, I was good with 7 or something, but like, I want to put my trust into you guys to make those decisions, because everything is different. We see it all the time in this country and any country. All laws, like, and punishments don't always meet what they were intended for. They make good things all the time that end up not working out so well for anybody. So that was my biggest thing, is like, we're counting on you guys, obviously, to make the judgment call, so to speak. I can understand the situation we're in and everything else, but at the end of the day, we need to put ourselves behind you guys.
Yep. And I would like to reiterate to my esteemed colleague here, this has nothing to do with me not trusting the administration, and more trying to understand, and I guess it's more around a question. Let's say something does go all the way through the board, and the board does decide to overturn something. What difference does it make at that point? Because the sentence has already been served. That's what I'm trying to wrap my head around. It doesn't have to do anything, with not trusting the administration on this, and more, why have the appeals process if it doesn't matter?
So remember, it's going to be longer term things. So
Yeah.
instead of being expelled and not having that opportunity for the rest of the year, or instead of being ineligible for a third of a season, they missed a few days. Okay, so you're saying something happened. Usually something did happen. If I'm coming to you with a situation, something happened. So if they have to serve 4 days out, they serve 4 days out. Okay, but instead of serving a third of a season ineligible, they serve 4 days for whatever they did. You know what I'm saying? The things that are come to the board are long-term. They're not just a 5-day suspension, 4-day suspension. We're talking eligibility, expulsions,
So
alternative
during the
educational
appeals
placements.
process, the board has the ability to, it's meant to allow the board to review the punishment and either concur with it or maybe curtail or change or whatever. That's what I'm trying to understand is, why have the appeals process if it's, but if they're longer term, let's say you say a full out of school year suspension or whatever, we look at the situation for whatever reason, the parent comes in, student comes in, we can decide half year or something.
Right.
That's what the point of the appeals process is?
Yeah.
Yeah, any expulsion will come to the board. You have to, because you are substantially changing that student's education program. And some of you have served on the board when we had expulsion hearings. And it's the opportunity for the student to come, present their information, and say, I deserve to either be in the school because this is what I did or what I didn't do, and then the board hears that and makes that ultimate determination for expulsion. 10-day out-of-school suspension is about the maximum that you go before you get to expulsion. you could have multiple 10 days, but that, I think you're having a different conversation because of probably placement of where the student is and what their educational program is. But I think when you're talking about substantially changing a student's education program, that has to be approved by the board.
I think that makes better sense to me. What I wasn't trying to wrap my head around, again, had nothing to do with not trusting the administration. And it had more to do, what's the point if the suspension had been served?
And that's what I was trying to say. Usually if it's coming to you guys, it's a pretty egregious situation.
Yeah.
Where I'm saying, I'm not talking the 1, 2, 3 day suspensions. I'm talking something that's happened where alternative placement, expulsion, ineligibility, code of conduct type things.
Thank you.
So what would be an example of something that would be 5+ days?
Bringing drugs to school.
Okay.
By finding a bag of weed in somebody's locker.
In their
maybe-
locker or on their person? What if somebody else put the
Whatever
weed in
might-
their locker?
What's that?
What if somebody else put the weed in their locker?
Well, we got cameras for stuff like that.
Okay.
Okay. I'm gonna do the
I
legwork.
imagine that's kind of the stuff Mr.
then
Gibson's
my
talking about.
job-
Someone put something in somebody else's locker, because I can tell you there was a little thing going on in junior high here a couple years ago that they were logging into other people's computer and looking up stuff they shouldn't.
So my job is to bring the evidence to you and say, here's why I'm making a decision and lay it out. And I'll usually have done pretty good research using cameras, student interviews, teacher interviews. There's gonna be a lot of parent conversation before that happens. And I'm gonna present you guys with information. And you'll be able to make a decision of, yes, this is the right move, or no, we're gonna bring you back. And we're gonna say, you guys might say, hey, admin team, we want you to build a safety plan for this kid. Or we want to build a response plan to help this kid improve. Whatever it might be. Let's dig into the why. Why is this kid sitting here right now? Why are we talking about this? What's the underlying issue? Okay, so we're gonna have those conversations. And those aren't fun conversations to have, but sometimes it happens, just working with people, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and the other thing that I would add, the role of the board is to look at, like you just said, the evidence that you present. Not to do our own research, not to have conversations on our own, but to trust that you're going to bring everything, which you will.
Right.
And I do trust you.
Thanks.
So again, I think just the role of a board is to, again, to look at the facts that you're going to present to us. We are like the jury. It's been my experience. So that is the way that we are supposed to operate.
And that kind of is where it can get tricky in this size of a town or community, because you're going to hear things. And sometimes it's hard for you guys to be unbiased and just hear both sides. So it does get tricky, but that is exactly what we're supposed to do.
Typically, how quickly do the appeals go? And that's even for the levels 1 through 3 and then the second with 3 to 4. That would be more my concern is like, we trust admin. I don't think that should be questioned, but that'd be my thing is like, if it is a level 1 through 3, is it sitting for several days or is it gonna go through?
So your chain of command in this process, so level 1s, level 2s. Let's say a kid comes to the classroom, this one happens a lot, I get this one a lot, and says, hey, Mrs. So-and-so, can I go use the restroom? Teacher says, yep, go ahead. But when they come back, the teacher gives them detention. Like, you're late, you got detention. Okay, and the kid can say, well, you said I could go use the restroom. So then they can appeal that with me and say, well, she actually gave me permission. That's a conversation we can have to see if we can reduce what happened, make it up another way, whatever it might be, okay? I know that's kind of a weird example to give, but I'm just saying, like, it starts with the kid saying, but Mrs. So-and-so, you said I could go. That's level 1, right? And if they come to me right away, I'd be like, hey, did you appeal with the teacher first? Did you say, hey, remember you said I could go before class? Okay, that's the whole reason. You lay out that chain of command. Did you do that first? Okay? Then they can come and appeal it with, let's say Mr. Weber, since he's going to be a dean next year. Hey, Mr. Weber, I want to appeal this with you. Or maybe he issued a consequence and they want to appeal his consequence with me, okay? And again, those things should happen fairly quickly, okay, within that school day. Even if I'm not in the office and let's say they talk to Deanne or Tiffany, they can be like, hey, Mr. Beckel, so-and-so's looking for you, wants to talk about X, Y, Z. And I'll go find the kid and be like, all right, what's going on, and we'll talk.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's more was like how I figured the first ones would go, and then the ones that even eventually get to us, I would even eventually look at wording or something to assure that process doesn't take 2 weeks. We just get it moving and seeing what we can do.
And if we get to a level 4, you guys will know as soon as they want to challenge it. And I'm assuming that would probably come from the superintendent level because they will have appealed with them too.
Okay, have no further concerns on that particular section.
Okay,
You,
moving on.
addressed that sufficiently. I understand better now. So
Thank you.
I think, I'm going to take a pause and allow one of the other board members or any of them if they have discussion items, because I do want to follow up for me on a few things on the SRG section, but I'll take a pause.
I have a few questions here for the, and I brought these up before and it doesn't look like they were addressed. The conduct as a learner. So I had some concern with like the wording of cheating, right? Suspected, cheating on an exam, require them to rework the exam or substitute exam. Why are we requiring someone to redo work if it's suspicion? Like there's no evidence that they cheated, right? Like we ran into that with a kiddo this past year who wrote this phenomenal paper, and they're like, wait a minute, ran it through all kinds of stuff. Nothing came back copied. At that point, we just had to let it go because there was no evidence to supplement the accusation of cheating. Wasn't gonna make them rewrite a paper because I didn't have evidence. Versus the other student who, I got it back that 96% of his paper was copy and pasted. That's easy. Redo it or you get a 0. So that wording just concerns me if there's no actual evidence to substantiate that.
Yeah, totally understand. So this is the part that came from our teacher committee that was working on grading policies and different handbook policies to update and change. Just because there was a little bit of concern about how we respond to plagiarism, cheating, and it really is coming from or being spurred by a lot of experiences with AI and teachers trying to navigate that. We're still learning about it, still trying to figure out ways to use it as a tool better, teach kids how to use it differently. But teachers were getting a lot of papers turned in where it was like very obviously not written by the student. Or
Have you guys found those programs where you can run through the AI?
Yep.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
And
we
it'll
just got
tell you, it'll
those and
say
they're wonderful.
80% AI generated. You know, it'll kind of give you an amount of the paper that was not,
Yes.
I don't even know how to say it, because
Not
technically it
written
does belong
by.
to the student the way it's written, you know what I mean?
Yes.
So trying to figure out how we can get like the actual work from the kid and understand what they know and can do. So that's kind of the point. If you suspect that there is some cheating that's happened, the intent there is for the teacher to say, okay, let me ask you some more questions to ensure that this is your work. Let me try to figure out how I can get that information from you. Or let me give you another opportunity where you can show me, yep, this is you. Just because like, hey, you were sitting by this kid, you guys got the same wrong answer, kind of seems a little fishy. Okay, so if we have ideas, I can rework that a little bit so it captures that intent better. But it was more of the substantiated to where they wanted to see the steeper consequences, and that's why they get stepped out a little bit more down below. But yeah, and that also could go through that appeals process. You know what I'm saying? If a kid says, no, I didn't cheat, this is my work, then we can generate some more conversation as well.
And then also, I guess if I'm playing down, did anyone have anything else on that? So with the electronic devices, 7 and 8 will have to put theirs away, correct?
Where are you at? I'm sorry.
7 and 8, 7th and 8th grade, they'll have to have their phones, it looks like they need to be put away until from 8:10 to 3:20.
Correct.
High school though, it says, it took out some of the previous wording and just says that it's a powerful tool and the expectations is they're not out. And can be used during passing period and other non-instructional. So is this essentially saying do not have these out during class?
Yeah, but it's worded in a way that what we were trying to capture is that there's times where teachers feel like, okay, we can actually use this, like reading a QR code for an activity. So it's really ensuring that the teacher has given permission to the student to have the phone out during instructional time. My policy that I put in there last year was not seen or heard during class time. I still support that. If a teacher says, I told you to put your phone away, you didn't put it away, now I'm going to confiscate it, it goes to the office. So that's still in play, but it gives the leeway to some of the teachers that want to use the creativity of like QR codes or whatnot.
Is there a way to note per teacher discretion or something, just so kids don't think, well, it says this. Well, no, if your teacher said this activity will require your phones. I'm just thinking from my experience.
Yeah.
It's really nice to have that in policy to tell the kiddos, hey, it's what it says, right? This is, I'm deferring to this, so I don't have to fight every single day with you over this, and that's a huge
We actually
fight.
had it worded that way at first, and the reason the team decided to remove it is because they felt that it put it on the teacher too much. Like it puts the teacher in the place to say, yeah, put your phones away. They didn't want to play bad guy, so to say, in that role, in that situation. So we're trying to figure out a way to word the policy where it lands on the school side of things or the handbook side of things. So the teacher could say, oh, handbook says you have to put it away. We're not using them.
Okay, because I guess from my point reading it, it kind of does exactly what you just said.
Yeah.
Reading it this way where I'm like, well, I guess I can argue I can have my phone out. So, okay.
Again, something I could add back to it. I mean, that's an easy one.
Is there any other discussion on the secondary handbook? All right. Thank you, Mr. Beckel. Elementary handbook, is there any discussions on that? I think
Is
Just
Weber
wait.
Dean of Students through elementary too? I did not realize that. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
And thank you for changing the wording on the attendance thing. I saw
Yep.
that. Awesome.
Yeah.
I read through it. I didn't have any questions on yours. Doesn't sound like we have any. So thank you for your work on it and updating it. So thank you. Okay, next we have the athletic activities handbook, and I think the major change, at least that I saw on this, was the extension of the good conduct policy to encompass 7th and 8th grade. So any discussion on that? I think Mr. Beckel, or Mr. Weber gave us an overview when he's early, and I didn't have any concerns myself, so. Okay. Next we have the certified staff handbook. I will take a pause. I think I mentioned earlier that I had some things I want to talk about on this, but I'll see if any of the members of the board wanted to start off.
So I have one question. Why is it the secondary and elementary handbook are 50 pages and this is 123 pages?
So this
As a
is
staff
all-
member, I would probably die and be like, are you kidding me?
So when we moved from the contract changing, all of that went in here. This is all the instructional plan. So we use this for PD. This is just kind of the guidebook. So if you need it as a reference, it's a reference book. We don't expect that there are certain sections that we say you need to read this, but otherwise we'll go to a PD and say, okay, turn to this page. We're going to talk through this. So it's to kind of house where all of the information that we're asking teachers to use throughout the year possibly is found. So our coaches use this, our instructional coaches will go in and say, so you want to learn about assessment, let's go to page 47. We might not look at 47 as a whole group, but a coach might use that because we needed to it's like our playbook for instruction. So it's a whole lot more information, but there's some of that targeted information as well. So we just put it all in one place.
Thank you, because it
Yes.
was like, wow, that's
Yeah.
impressive.
No, we don't
Okay.
ask that you go through it all, just the HR section and a few other sections, so. And we talk about all that at the beginning of the year.
So I think I'll just jump in. We'll pass around and have a discussion around this. So the standard reference grading, which is obviously in this section, there's been a lot of discussion around that. I think over the past year, I had the opportunity myself to attend some of the committee meetings that had people working really hard to figure this out and make changes. And I think there's definitely some positive, movement going forward. But I'm still challenged with a few things, and we've talked about this. And I don't see anything in this update that's going to fix a couple of concerns that I have, and I worry about going into next year with that being addressed. And I just wanted to address those and maybe have a conversation around that. But one of them that I had brought up was the ability as a parent to monitor my kids' grades on a timely basis and be able to intervene in an appropriate amount of time to get him back on track. And one of the things I noticed that changed over the last couple of years is as my kids were in the regular grading system, you know, each week, I think in each class, they would get a grade on something. It may be one thing, it may be two things, but I was able to easily tell if they were heading in the wrong direction on a weekly basis. And when I noticed this last school year, I didn't have that. And what happened is when we came time for the semester, when grade reports, all of a sudden I would just get hammered. My phone would start going ding, 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 all in a 24-hour period. And I'd start seeing zeros, ones, whatever. And I start panicking because, you know, I had just read the day before that the grade reports were going to be pulled the next day, right? And I'm like, what does this mean? So then I call, and the conversation I get is, oh, you can just ignore that because they're in progress. I'm like, well, what do you mean you can ignore it? You got a zero, right? So translating that between, you know, I see a zero, I received that as my kid just got an F. Like I need to understand that, and that I feel is still a big issue for me that doesn't appear to being solved as we go into the next, you know, school year on two things. One, getting timely updates. Like I need to understand how my kid is progressing before an assessment is graded, right? That's something I need. And when I read this, I think we made positive strides towards saying that we're going to grade bodies of evidence, but it doesn't come out and mandate that bodies of evidence must be submitted, bodies of evidence must be graded. And I'm not saying that is the solution, but what I am saying is as a parent, I need to understand where my kid is at prior to the day before grades are pulled or when the semester ends, and I get 30 updates on Infinite Campus that day as the teachers are mad rushing in trying to get all the assessments in. So
Right.
that was
So,
one of my concerns.
Yep, no, so I can address that. Unfortunately, regardless of grading system, that happened.
But that
So
didn't happen to me before.
Well, it's happened because we've dealt with it before. So a teacher wouldn't put in information until right before a test came. So that to me isn't a grading, standards-based grading or not. As a teacher, I feel like I should have the discretion of what I consider homework and what I don't. I'll speak for myself because that's easiest. I don't give a lot of homework. I just don't. I talk to kids one-on-one a lot. That's what I spend my time on at conference. Every teacher sets their class up differently. And I think that's what we have to make sure we respect. I also agree with you that we have to make sure that if kids are not making progress, we have better communication with families. That to me is without question. I teach a different level class, so I have those conversations with students first, and then if I'm not seeing any resolution, because I want them to build capacity to do that themselves. But you're talking about younger kids, you're talking about kids that are in multiple classes that don't advocate or aren't being asked to. So I understand what you're saying. That to me isn't a standards reference grading. I don't think it's fair to impose on a teacher and say you have to have 3 homework assignments every week. I think we need to have a better process so that parents understand how to use the app, because you can see any missing assignments on there, a body of evidence. You can see that every single day. So I think we can do better training around that. I think we can do better conversations with teachers about how do you communicate if a student is not where they need to be. We have some teachers that do an amazing job at that, right? If you're struggling, you not only do you know, but your parents know. I know that I have teachers in the high school that send multiple emails to parents if kids aren't every week. And so it's not because of standards reference grading, it's how are we communicating those expectations to kids and to home. And that I think we can do better at. But the idea that this process of standards reference grading is impacting that, I would say I don't agree with that, because the same questions came up with homework for the last however many years of education. So I think that there are things that we have to target around that issue, but I don't know that they're in the standards reference grading, because you're just talking about the difference between what we're calling bodies of evidence and what we're calling homework.
I think, you know, one of the things that's challenging for me is I've been through all the training on Infinite Campus, right? And I made a concerted effort to look at that every single day. And the challenge is, sure, you have all of the objectives, I think, or the curriculums listed in there of what they're going to do, but they're blank. Well, then sometimes I saw a 0. So I'd ask the question, why does he have a 0 on there? Well, he's still learning it. Okay, what does that mean? When's he going to get an update? Well, he's not going to get an update till an assessment. When's he going to get the assessment? Oh, we're not going to do that for 3 weeks. I can't wait 3 weeks to understand if my son's progressing, right? I need to have more feedback. And I think the challenge for me is, for better for worse, standards-based grading or not, I had more information to be able to help with my kids' education when we were on the A through D system than I did on standards reference grading. Now, I'm not saying that you can't go down standards reference grading path. I'm saying it's still broke, like there's a fundamental broke. And this is my experience I'm giving you. I continue to get that feedback from members of the community and from the constituents that they're in the same situation. So that's why I bring this up, because that's kind of my role as the board to bring that up.
Right.
And I think the challenge for me is it's not that I want it to go away necessarily, but we're not making any progress on it. And here we are, that I'm about to vote to approve this, and it doesn't have changes in it to address some of those concerns that I brought up with the committee when I went in and met with them.
Right.
So,
And I think what I would say is, to be fair, that committee is full of professionals.
yeah.
There are people who do this day in and day out, every single day. It's what they've made their career path, and this is the recommendation they're giving you. There's a learning curve, and to expect that that's going to be different in a year, I would say yes, right? This was an implementation year. I don't know who would ever look at this year and say this is success or not when it's the first year. Typically, 3 years is what you give something for implementation at a high level, and this is a high-level change. So I would say that we made strides. We had conversations in the fall where we had questions from parents. We had the committee look at those questions. They addressed them. They made changes. I think we brought those to the board, and we didn't have those same kinds of questions. I think the fundamental thing we're talking about here is the difference between homework and saying, is homework accountable for a student? Is it practice, right? And are we actually assessing students on how they're practicing the skill, or are we assessing students on do they know the skill? Because that's the timing thing you're talking about. Because if I give students 4 days or 8 days or 2 weeks to learn a skill, am I giving them a grade on each one of those practices? And if you're doing a body of evidence and you're showing that, then yes, you are. But I might give checks because I'm paying attention to how my class is being run. So I might not give bodies of evidence every day. I might give 2 in that same period, which should give that student and a parent that information. This year, we had teachers learning the system, learning the new Infinite Campus, right? So there were a lot of different things that were in play. So I would say if this is still a concern after this next year, then that's something that you bring back to the committee and said, we were told this was something that was going to be put in play. I would say there's been a lot of work toward that already. And I will say, because I've talked to the teachers, and I trust that they're telling me that they're understanding it. It might not be as much as parents want, so we have to find that balance. But that doesn't mean it's not being done. It's not being done to a level that we're used to. Maybe parents give a little bit, maybe the school gives a little bit, right? We come to the agreement where we'd like to see 2 or 3 things every 2 weeks. Okay, does that give parents enough information? Well, for some, yes. Some, maybe not, right? They're going to want something every day. Some parents don't even look at the grades. So it's trying to find that balance, but I'd be very cautious of saying it doesn't work after an implementation year with a new program to give that communication to parents, that new system. So I hear what you're saying, but I think that there's got to be a conversation around what does that mean in the class for the teacher, as opposed to it's a broken system as a result of that, because they're not really the same thing. One is a result of the other, but if teachers are giving effective communication, it shouldn't matter how many times it's in the grade book.
Okay.
I have a few things on this. Shocker. So I looked into this obviously quite a bit. This has been my passion the whole time. I've emailed and spoke with you on concerns I had to take back to the committee. I went to the committee. That did not go well. Immediately shut down by my concerns were my concerns and not community concerns. So question my integrity in that I talk to people. I'm not going to make stuff up. That's not who I am, nor representative of who I am. So that was extremely frustrating. Nothing was changed. When I started my teaching career, I shadowed a teacher at Roosevelt, and they had done the system there, and he's like, it's confusing, I don't like it does not give a good representation of kids, okay? And I am speaking on secondary. For like the 1,000th time, secondary is where my concern is. And I just shadowed another teacher at Roosevelt who has an admin background, multiple years as a principal, a teacher for multiple years, and then went back to teaching because they just needed a break from the stress. Understandable. So I knew I was shadowing them for AP classes, talking with them, and even they said, hate the system. If I could take it out, I'd take it out today. And this is someone who's been exposed to it, who in admin, so again, professional, which I respect. And I respect the teachers here that are saying that. It's just a disagreement. I also use Infinite Campus for my job. I've used it ever since I've taught, and I could not follow along with my secondary child's progress at all. There's just nothing inputted. And then she gets a grade put in right before the end of the semester where she doesn't have time to make changes, and she has the lowest grade in that subject out of her entire career. And I've also heard, well, it doesn't affect GPA. Well, we went on a college visit, and guess what? It affects GPA. It knocked her GPA down a notch where she's going to miss out on a $1,000 a year scholarship because of that. So it does directly affect it, and it's something she couldn't fix. Had I been able to follow along all school year and say, like I had in years past, and say, ooh, we're struggling on the subject, aren't we? Let's get with the teacher. I, by no means, think teachers should be required to give homework or classwork or body of evidence or whatever magical word we're going to use to describe it. However, I think a responsible one's going to do it at some point. I don't give stuff every week. Absolutely not. I don't give stuff every day. But I have enough in there that my parents of my kids know how my students are doing, and they can contact me before an assessment. I can say, dude, we are struggling in this subject, aren't we? Before we assess, we need to talk. Because it keeps that in, but they're buying in and they're doing the work. That is not happening. And a lot of the changes or requests or conversations I've asked to have get shut down. No one wants to hear it. They don't want to work with it. And I could not go to an event without a parent talking to me saying, are we going to get this changed? Because this was the sole thing I ran on. And I just now had another one say, I was thinking of open enrolling my kid. I may not if that doesn't go away, because that's why we're leaving the school we're at. Another straight A student got her first B ever. Her mom was pissed. Second to last day of school because the teacher just entered grades that day, and they said, oh, sorry, can't make that up. We have a day left of school. Completely destroyed her GPA because she was hoping to be valedictorian or work toward it as a freshman. Completely screwed her GPA because of that. Had her mom been able to stay with it through the whole year, maybe a different story. So I think there are still huge discussions and problems and concerns and changes that need to be made so parents can be actively involved. Again, secondary level is what I'm looking at because this is affecting them outside of here. I've gotten, talked to people at other schools that have used this system and almost constantly hear the same complaint. I've seen it affect my own kid, and now I've seen it affect their future, and I can't afford to pay for everything that she's going to need in college due to her exceptional circumstances and story. And she just got screwed out of $1,000 because of it. So I still see major issues with it. I've tried to work on it, like I said, and continuously get shut down, as though it's just my opinion coming to this table. I can't go to the community without being spoken to on it, and extremely frustrating.
And I think that that's my frustration as well, because since December, I've heard nothing from a single community member, not one thing. So if this is a conversation that needs to happen, then the community needs to tell us what those specific issues are.
And I do advise them to come direction, I can't force them to.
And I would say, in fairness, every concern you've brought, we've taken to the committee and they've evaluated. Every single one. The conversation that you and I had, the conversation when you were in the committee, all of those conversations happen. Doesn't mean we're going to agree, doesn't mean that it's going to automatically change, it means the conversation is happening. That's what I have to really try and find a balance with, because if there is a huge concern, we need to hear about it. I went and talked to every single high school teacher after the first grading period went out, and I said, what questions do parents have? What are you getting asked? Because that's your first line, right? You're not going to just come to the superintendent, or you're not going to just go to the principal. You're going to go to that teacher if you have a concern. So how many people have come to you with questions since we've done grading and since we've kind of worked out the 4s and we've kind of worked out how that looks and we've talked about bodies of evidence? Not one person had a parent talk to them. Those are our teachers in the classroom, and I talk to every high school teacher. So there's a dichotomy between what people are telling the board and what we're hearing, because we're not hearing anything.
I
It's gonna
understand
be
that, and that's
really
why
hard.
I bring it. And I also went and spoke to the secondary teachers at Christmas time, and I came back toward the middle, and the consensus I got from probably 90% was it would be really nice to have that power back to grade assignments, to get that buy-in from kids, because
And they
it's
can
so
do that.
frustrating to get that buy-in because they don't get a grade for it that counts toward anything.
And that was changed. So
So
now
I
a student
don't
can
see that
change,
changed anywhere.
a teacher can take a body of evidence, what was called a body of evidence, and have it be an assessment. So it shows up as an assessment. That's something that we changed as a result of the feedback. So now it comes in as an assessment, because I know that I've talked to 2 teachers that had that same concern, and they use it now as an assessment. So that's feedback that was taken. Doesn't mean every teacher's going to do it, but that's feedback.
It's
Is
just
that
creating
change in
tests,
here
though.
then, on the proposed changes to the?
It would be in what we talk with teachers about, but we could add it to this.
Okay, so that's an example of ones
Right,
that I had
right.
concerns, but I didn't see those changes actually outlined in here. So
Because that would be a discussion, like what equates that? I can all of a sudden say they did this body of evidence, so now I'm going to make it an assessment that,
You would determine that before you give it.
that's what I'm saying. So then it's an assessment, it's not a body
Right,
of evidence.
right.
That's what I'm saying.
What would normally become a body of evidence for a teacher under the old system, it's not the final assessment, but now they can do it in chunks. So if, let's say I'm a math teacher, and I'm teaching them an equation that has 4 steps or 4 parts, I can now make each one of those steps an assessment and then assess the whole thing. Whereas before, that might be considered a body of evidence. I'm practicing, so that I can do this task, which is the standard. Now you can take those and chunk it apart and make those actual assessments, and that's what the
And that
teachers
could
asked
maybe
for.
work for some classes like math or something, but I'm thinking like in history, my overall standard, that'd be really hard to chunk. Because some of those only have one standard, basic
Correct.
standard I'm looking at. So I'm looking at one assessment.
Right.
So I'm just, the feedback I got, a lot of them were like, it was nice when we had an open window to have some of these discussions, debates, assignments, classwork, whatever you want to call it, because without them being graded, kids aren't buying into it. And I get kids don't do homework, but drastically different consensus what I've gotten back on kids are not doing the body of evidence compared to homework before, at least per my conversations.
I think another thing, and sorry, I had 3 things I want to address. The first one I brought up, but I want to split it up to allow other members to talk, so I will take a pause between my 3. I think the other thing I wanted to bring up, which you kind of touched on about the conversations, and I don't know how to necessarily, solve for this, but Jessica's right. I can't go to an event. I think you and I talked about this. I was eating dinner with my family, extended family, at Iron Horse in Osceola, and got approached by a parent sitting there eating, asking when we're going to get rid of standards-based grading as I'm out eating dinner. And that happens all the time for me, as well as emails and feedback on it. And I understand you're not getting that. That's one aspect. I think the worst aspect that I'm trying to understand is I get emails from teachers, from secondary teachers that want this to go away. And I know you went and talked with each one of them, and it sounds like you got maybe a different message, and I don't know how to handle that. In fact, I had asked, and I said in a previous board meeting, could we get one secondary teacher, 9th through 12th, to come talk to us about this. And I think we had a couple of 7th grade teachers talk in that meeting, 7th, 12th grade, but still to this date, haven't, not only have I not had a 9th through 12th, teacher come and say, well, you and I talked about this. Yes, you have, Dr. Dentlinger. I think that's what I'm trying to understand. I have to figure out how to process that when I get that feedback pretty consistently, that our secondary teachers aren't happy with this. And I know we haven't had this discussion, but now we're at a point, on the board table, now we're at a point that we're approving policy, and what I'm trying to process is how do I, vote to approve this, knowing that I had all of that feedback, and wishes from parents and teachers, but not a lot of those changes were made in this policy. I don't think this is bad. I don't think this is broken. I think that it needs substantial changes to it, and we had a couple months to work on that, and I just feel we didn't make as much progress as what we could. So, from my peers, I'm not necessarily saying I don't want to approve the handbook, but I also want to understand how do we get real on this and sit down and have a conversation. And like you said, we're not always going to agree on things, and there's some things we're going to make some decisions on that you may not agree with and that the committee may not agree with, but we're also taking that input from all the different aspects as well. So that was the second thing all the feedback I'm getting from the staff, the teachers and the parents on this, it doesn't stop. It's pretty consistent. And then the third thing for me is, you mentioned something, what's best for kids. And when kids get out of high school, they're going to go to college. They're not going to run into standards-based grading. And those professors aren't going to be as, what's the word I'm looking for, reasonable with them when kids don't turn in homework, right? So going back to the teaching the good citizen aspects of things, and I know Ms. Good and I have had tons of conversations. That's not the point of grading, and I get that. I just want to understand, what are we going to put in addition to teach, good citizenship if we're not doing it with homework anymore and having consequences for deadlines? So anyways, those are my three things. Again, I'm not saying I don't want to approve this, but what I'd say to my colleagues is we can't, we got to have some sort of substance that forces the conversation when we do approve this to make substantial changes to address the things that I'm concerned about, that the parents are concerned about, and the secondary teachers and staff are concerned about.
And I would say that's a unique thing that we have to do and people forget is, we can have conversations and have different opinions with the professionals. That doesn't mean we don't support them. That doesn't mean that we don't respect them. It means that we have differing opinions and there's conversations that have to happen. That's called life and being a professional. So we have to take in the teacher's opinions, the teacher's thoughts, the admin's opinions, the admin's thoughts, as well as the people who we're here to represent, our constituents, the community, the family, and what we think is best or what we hear from students. And a lot of the exceptional tag-based students I know have come either to me via them in conversation or via a parent and said that the system's awful, that this hurts them more than anyone is how they feel. And I said, I don't know how to fix that. I said, I know that's a challenge, but I have to balance all those voices. It's not just because you don't go a certain way doesn't mean I don't respect you and I don't see what you're saying. It means I have all these other groupings in which I have to represent when I'm up here to make those decisions. And I just think that needs to be remembered and understood when we have these conversations or when we make decisions and stuff, is it's just because it doesn't go a certain way doesn't mean we're not trying to represent you or figure out how to come back, but we represent more than one group of people up here.
Well, and I think something to remember, we have some new teachers. It's a new system, and what I'm just listening to you guys as you're talking, there's not enough data for parents, which is a technology issue, and maybe a teacher didn't have enough information or didn't understand or didn't know how, I don't know, to put that data in the system. So there's definitely some learning that needs to take place. I think Sharon acknowledged that, but the top things that I'm hearing are, you can't log into Infinite Campus, you can't see where your student is at, you can't see what is missing, you don't know how to educate them, you don't know how to come alongside them. That's a training, that's a learning curve, and I think, you know, we're saying this needs to be worked on. So my takeaway is, you know, we can't go back and change anything that has been done. I don't want to discredit any of the hard work that's been done. You know, and this is a question for you, Sharon. When teachers are writing out their plan for the year, and they put together their rubrics and their assessments and the standards and all of this, this past year, this is my assumption, that has been a lot of the work that's been done this year, is just building that. Is that a fair
Probably
assumption?
the last 3 years.
Okay.
Yep.
But when you have different teachers that are
Correct.
coming into it,
Correct.
and
They
we've
get all the
had-
resources, but they still make it their own.
yes.
That's exactly
And
right.
we've had several new teachers in the secondary, plus new administration. So there's a lot of moving parts, I think, that didn't really set us up to be successful right out of the gate. So that's why we're constantly going back to the table. But, you know, I would like to see what this next year holds, because I think that we do have some groundwork. You know, everybody knows, it's recorded. Here's the issues, here's still our concerns, here's what's not working right now, right? If we can't see where our kids are at and we don't feel like we can educate them or help them out, that's a problem. But anyway, sorry, back to my question. Rubrics, assessments, and the standards, and forgive me if I'm not getting this. Once it's built, next year, the teacher can use that same, everything the same if they want to. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. That just helps me, thank you.
And I think, just to be kind of, I hate to do this because I feel like I'm speaking for Chad, but having conversations with him, I feel like this is one of those things that you possibly consider a task force for. Because here's the thing, if you're getting all this data from your constituents and we're getting none, there's a real dichotomy, right? Like that's a real problem. And so, is there a way to take a few members from that committee who have the background, who've done a lot of the legwork, and a couple of parents who have concerns, maybe a board member, and create a task force to work through those issues that are still beyond technology, right? Seeing those scores, to say, okay, these are the 3 things we need to focus on, right? Like, these are the 3 things. I acknowledge that we're still implementing, right? That's the way it is, any change. But I think that there are a lot of questions maybe, and maybe we're not doing a very good job of communicating what those answers are, but we're not getting feedback that we're not. You are, right? But they also know that you want to hear that feedback. We've told repeatedly that we want to hear that feedback. We're still not hearing it. So can we create a task force of what you're hearing, what we're doing, and try and get those things resolved over the course of the next year, as we say, I mean, there's nothing to say that next year, the year after, you say, you know what, we want to change it to this. Okay, that's what this process is about. But I think my challenge is that this has been going on since before I came. We've talked about the history, right? This is something that was started before I even started my tenure here. We put it on hold a different time or two because we had questions still. We prepared more training. We have, we've shared the timeline, all of those things. So I don't think anyone on the committee wants to force something that's not successful. But we're also seeing increases in our test scores. We're also seeing students deliberately focused on standards and understanding of those standards at a high level. Those things are all things that are attributed to this process of really understanding the standards at a deep level. That's not to say that that can't happen at an A, B, C, D, F, right? There's nothing to say that that can't happen in that format as well. But there's nothing to say that this format is as awful as it is when we just did a year of implementation. So I would suggest that you take that kind of idea, bring those people that have the concerns to the meeting so we can hear what they are, right? We can hear what those things are and see how do we then work it out. And if that's not a process that works, that task force, whatever you want to call it, to target those very specific things. And I think you're back here next year having that same conversation. Is there something different, right? Is there a different way to approach this? So that's just a suggestion I would have. Because I do think that there's still questions to be answered as far as how does that body of evidence and the homework create some of that accountability? How often are teachers putting that in? have you had a conversation with the teachers and how they're doing it? Because you and I have talked about my class and the information that you see on that, right? Like, so we have those conversations. It helps that I'm a teacher and I can talk to you about that, but you don't go and have that conversation with every teacher, so we need to have people that are representative. So I do think that there's some, we know there's work to be done, there always will be, always. But I think that there's some definite opportunity to take the work that has been done, the questions that still exist, and bring those together to come to resolution.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions.
Yep.
One of my questions being, let's say we approve this tonight. What does it take to amend something in the handbook? Do we have to do 3 readings or anything,
No.
or is it just we amend it at a meeting?
Correct.
Correct, but with the stipulation that the administrators have asked us not to change the handbook in the middle of a year. So essentially, to answer your question, and we wouldn't get another shot at this until this time next year, because they don't like to have the handbook changed in the middle of the school year. So that's why we're having this passionate debate right now, because, you know, not that we can't make and approve a change here and come back next month maybe after working sessions and having a conversations. I mean, that's where my head was at, but once school starts, we shouldn't touch this until next year. So that's why it's so important we have this
Yeah.
conversation now, so.
Yeah, I wouldn't change anything in the grading practice during any year,
Okay, well that,
between the semesters.
all right, that makes a little bit final hour decision. The next thing I'd like to do, and Chad, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'd like to hear where you're at. Because you are our new superintendent, sir, and if you don't want to speak,
No, he can't.
okay.
Yep, sorry about that, sir. Yeah, we have to, Dr. Dentlinger is still our superintendent until the 30th, so. And I think one of the things is, Dan, though, to answer your question, is we are planning working sessions, obviously, with ISB and Chad, to have those conversations. So you know, if I could take a stab at answering some of your questions on this is, you know, where I'm at least is, you used the word broken earlier to describe how I was saying. I wasn't saying that. What I was saying was we spent some time having conversations with the committee, having conversations with, you know, I know you said you're not hearing that. I'm bringing you everything that I hear, right? And I brought the committee everything I heard. And I just didn't see a lot of representation of that feedback. Sure, it makes some positive changes, but I think we need to understand where Mr. Grandin's at and have that discussion as a group. I think the challenge, what I'm trying to understand here is we've got a very short window and we need to have that conversation together as a group. And is it possible, let's say we continue to move this forward, to have that conversation in July and bring this back on the July schedule? So, you know, potentially on the outcomes. Does that answer where you were trying to get to? Like, do we have a chance to come back at
That
this
gives
after we
me a
get
better
Chad's?
answer, because what
Yeah.
I was looking for is like, can we approve this and then maybe amend a couple of things through the year, right at the beginning of the year, what have you, to curb towards some of the stuff we're looking for. I mean, you said that we've fixed some of it and everything else, but we just didn't put it in here.
Right.
Well, I think what I personally am looking for, and I think some of the rest of the board it looks like is too, is like, I would like to see it in there. Just to clarify, like, for the people that get with us and everything else, that, hey, yes, we are working on this, it's right here in the handbook.
Right. I would say, you know, obviously an approach you can take is approve the handbook and then just bring an amendment to the next meeting, you know, after you do your work sessions. I mean, that's obviously an approach you can take. Obviously, you can table the topic. I think that puts your administrators in a bad spot because of timing, especially since this has been something we've talked about for 3 months. And I have no conversations beyond the people who came to the committee, right? Like, this is putting your administrative team, I think, in a kind of in a tough spot. I would encourage, and I think we've tried to do this, parents to let us know. And I know you're the voice of them, and I think you guys do a good job of bringing that to us. But I think that there's got to be, you know, a real understanding of, if we're going to table this, then we understand that we're putting all of these other processes in a bad spot, because this is what drives the work that we do all summer, right? Like, the handbooks are what we use to drive all the work for PD, for all of the documents that we get ready to send out for parents, for updating, all of those things, which doesn't mean we can't do it. I'm just,
I
I'm
don't
gonna
think,
just-
I'm not hearing at least that anybody's interested in tabling the entire handbook. I think what we're trying to understand is, what are the options for us approving this? And at least some of us feel that it still needs more work, and directing to make sure that we have a conversation really quick and bring back potential amendments, in July, so we can get it to a spot that, I think, again, just speaking for me, I don't know where it'll come in our discussions, but better meets the expectations of the community and the secondary staff that I continue to hear from. And I like your idea where you talked about having the task force. I think one of the things that I observed when I was on the committee, and you and I kind of talked about this briefly, was there was one high school teacher in that room, right? And our main concern was 9th through 12th. Yes, we had instructional coaches, but there was one high school teacher sitting in that room when I was on the committee. Now, I know that you had said you offered that and anybody could volunteer, and I get that, but I don't know if there are just things over time where people felt it didn't matter if I was in that room, my voice isn't heard. So one of the things I'd like to work with, potentially with Chad and the others is, how do we bring the secondary staff back to the room and say, okay, you've been telling me this, here's an opportunity for you to tell, the same thing to everybody in that room, and have that task force be the people that are living it, the concerns that we hear, which is 9th through 12th. I really don't think anybody K through 6 should be in those conversations, right? We're not talking about them. Like, that's not a concern, but they tend to, there's different personalities, right, in different rooms that will tend to, just by nature, I'm one of them, of being in the room to shut down others from talking, right? So we got to be careful of that and figure out how we bring those other voices to the table, so.
Yeah, I think
I would
that there are
second
some.
that.
Go ahead.
Because
I
that's
think there
a
are-
concern I've gotten from people, is they would like, and even as somebody, again, I work at a secondary building and we have middle school in our same building. We have different committees. Middle school has committees, high school has committees, and elementary. Now, if there's a time we all need to come together, we'll come together and discuss. But elementary doesn't know the concerns or struggles I'm dealing with as a high school teacher, and vice versa. I don't know what they're going through as elementary. I wouldn't want to. God bless them. That's a lot of work that elementary takes on. I think there needs to be a separation where secondary can look at the issues that are at secondary, and elementary can deal with what's going on with them, because they do not cross. And if there's a time they need to come together and say, okay, this is where we're at, how are you guys doing, what can we bounce up? That's great, but I think there needs, and that was oftentimes a voice I heard was, there needs to be separation, because I can't even speak when I go into it, and secondary is not represented. When I went, there was 2, at the time, what was considered secondary, and we're barely able to speak or have an opinion heard because it was shut down. Well, in elementary, we're not dealing with that. That's wonderful, and that's great, but it's not comparable.
Yeah, and I think that you're to the point now, like the discussion is to the point now. We put the committee together because it needed to be consistent, right? You needed to have your at the time, K4 build into your 5-8, which built into your 9-12. So they all had to be at the conversation at the table, because some of the conversations were those high-level things. What are we going to do? Body of evidence. What is going to be a 3? Like those kinds of conversations. So that's why that group was joined. I think you're to the point now where the conversations are more specific to 7-12 or to K6. And I know that there's been a lot of conversation that we don't need to talk about the elementary because they're doing things right. I would argue that the elementary has had a tremendous learning curve through this process. We've always been standards-based grading, but we weren't grading by standards. And so this work has encompassed our whole staff. So I don't ever want to diminish what that team has done.
And
I know you're not either. I know you're not either.
For the record, I'm not.
But I think when we talk about that and say, well, we're not worried about at all what the elementary is doing, well, you should be, right? Like as a board, you should be worried about the whole K-12 program. So I think that you're to the point now where you might want to have that task force separate to address some of these very specific issues at 7-12, and then have the conversation maybe as a big group. Here's what we were hearing from constituents. Here's what we heard from students. Here's what we heard from parents. But I think there has to be a deliberate process to collect that data. Because if you're at the family table and you're at Hy-Vee and you're talking to the same person who's very opinionated, that's one voice, right? I could probably pull in 8 or 10 or 12 parents myself that like standards reference grading. So I think we have to be very careful. This would be something that you need to collect data on to understand at what level, how much, what are some of the suggestions, because parents they've been to school, they can give us suggestions as well. And I think that's what that task force should really embrace, is how do we make this I-35's process for communicating grades to parents and students so that they can be successful whatever they do next. Like, that should be the intent of whatever this group is. I think that's the intent of the Standards Reference Grading Committee. I think that's the intent of everyone on the board. But I do think that you're to the point where that needs to probably be a separate conversation between what we're saying is secondary now, 7 through 12, and what we call elementary.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate that. I think that's where my head was at. I will reiterate the feedback I get is 7 through 12. Not that elementary isn't, but I've never had an elementary parent come and tell me they have an issue with the grading practices. So thank you for clarifying that. So I think there's, at least listening to my colleagues and listening to Dr. Dentlinger, there's, potentially two aspects of this. Longer term, task force, which I think I support, but at the same time, these are our kids' lives we're dealing with. They're parents that have been, communicating to us for over a year. There are teachers communicating to us for over a year. I do believe that we have to do something going into next year's, school district. Like, we can't just wait for a task force to come together. What those things are, I don't necessarily know the solutions. I would like to see, us figure out how to address, at least for me, the concerns that I brought up at the beginning, as far as, how to figure out how I can be an effective, engaged parent, and having those discussions in a working session, and potentially, coming back in July. I know Jessica's got some things that she'd like to address, and Dan, you had a couple things as well. Melissa, I hear you. There's a ton of hard work that was put into this, and not that needs to be scrapped. I think one of my bigger concerns is we didn't maybe necessarily plan this out very well before we implemented it, maybe another year. And I'm not saying that's anybody's fault. I think we all learned. But I'm definitely not saying we should throw it away. So
Well, here's a couple things that I'm going to say. One is, if there is teachers that are still struggling with it, and I think that I've heard you guys both mention there's teachers that come to you. If there are teachers that are coming to you and not going to their administrator, that's a problem.
Agreed.
Love it that they come to you,
Yep.
but
And
I'm
I've
going to say,
redirected.
but I'm going to say it's been a year, 2-3 years that we've been doing this, and at some point we have to get the ball going, and we have to trust the system that's been put in place and have one full year of what's been done this past year, because this has been a disruption, and I get it, again, and one thing that we didn't even talk about was the students. Do the students understand? And we're talking about the parents don't understand the technology, they don't know how to support their kids, there's an issue with teachers not understanding it, but the students, do the students understand? And if they understand, that's my main concern right there. If they understand how to get a 4, and I think that work has been done. If they don't, they need to go to their teacher, or the teacher needs, and I'm not a teacher, so I'm throwing my opinion out there, but I guess where I'm at is, if you are hearing people in the community, those people need to speak up. Because I'll be honest, nobody comes to me. I wasn't voted for that. But, and I'm not saying I'm not willing to listen at all, okay? So, but I'm just saying, it's been a year, and we have worked, and it's a standing agenda item, and at some point I just really feel like we gotta get it going. And we know what the issues are, and we've had a committee. Whether or not, everybody agrees with what the committee came back with, there was that opportunity. And I guess that's where I'm at. The teachers had the opportunity, the parents had the opportunity. There was learning sessions done on Infinite Campus. Yeah, there's some issues still. Let's work through it. But where I stand, I would like to see it implemented. I would like to see another year where we look at, okay, at the end of the year, or we do a 6-month check. What's not working? Adam, come to us and tell us exactly what struggles the teachers are still having, right? what parent concerns you're getting, because if I'm a parent, I'm gonna email the teacher and I'm gonna copy you. That's just what I'm gonna do. So that's where I stand on it.
Thank you. All right, is there any further discussion on the certified staff handbook? All right, we'll move on to the non-certified staff handbook. Any discussion on that? Okay, seeing no discussion. The technology user agreement.
So
I didn't,
those
oh, sorry,
are,
go
A
ahead.
is all of one.
Oh, I'm
So all
sorry,
the
A, so
handbooks
we'll
are
stop
one.
there,
Yep,
sorry.
so if you want to stop there.
Yep. So we had discussions on each of the action items, and based off that, I will entertain a motion by any member of the board to approve the, I guess, various handbooks.
I would make a motion to pass the handbooks with the exception of tabling the SRG grading information noted in the secondary and the certified staff handbook in regards to secondary. I believe those are pages 40, 41, 24, 25, I think, or something like that, 30s. Anyway, to allow us to have that review, discussion, and possible changes made. We have a work session noted in July with the new superintendent to delve into it more and give us time to talk with admin more one-on-one in regards to this as well. And this would just ensure that that stuff can be made and done and implemented before the start of the school year.
Okay, you're gonna have to give me a moment, and I think April a moment here to make sure, and we can have discussion on that. So if I understand, I'm trying to summarize what you're saying. You're making a motion to approve all the handbooks, with the exception of the changes in the certified staff handbook that pertain to SRG, I'm trying to remember what you said, to allow for the discussion in July with the administrators.
Yes.
And then we can bring this back up in the July
So
meeting?
essentially, yes, table the grading information for now, pass everything else in the handbooks, let them get them rolling, so that we can have those conversations that need to be had, particularly with the new superintendent.
So would you just be bringing an amendment to the next meetings then?
Well, it sounds like she's asking to table
Can
the
we
existing
table the one
changes.
section and pass the rest of the handbook?
She's asking to table the section, so you bring back the
Grading policy.
section with potential amendments in the July one. So you bring back the changes that are proposed here with potential amendments, depending on the outcome of those working sessions. Does that make sense to do that?
So all the SRG
Changes.
is just the certified staff handbook?
Yeah,
Is taken out.
the changes that were made
Yeah, the secondary handbook,
revert
certified
back
and
to the
secondary.
to the original, correct?
Okay.
With regards to elementary, it can stay, but
But
the
that's,
others, whether we have to wait to approve all that, but it's more or less to look at the secondary aspect.
Dr. Dentler?
So the challenge is that you're reverting it back to what it was without all the changes that we've made since the conversation started. So you're still going to have SRG, and because that's what was approved in last year's handbook.
Yes, can we not table it and make the amendment to the grading system as needed in July?
You can, but you're going back to the SRG without all the changes that we've made this
Well,
year.
because the changes that are in it now don't really represent much of what we're discussing anyway, and the stuff that you brought up as possible changes could be part of the discussion we were talking about, to be part of the amendment.
Okay, so you're going to last year's SRG handbook.
Yep,
Okay.
amendment to go back and discuss the grading system as a whole.
So the motion though is to.
That's the motion, is to basically, let me change the wording. The motion is to basically scratch the changes to the handbook, to the SRG in the handbook,
Okay,
and approve everything else,
okay,
with direction that there'll be a working session to bring an amendment back to the
That
meeting
doesn't
in
have to be
July.
part of the motion.
That doesn't have to be a part of the motion. Okay.
okay, I'm good now.
Okay. So there is a motion on the table to summarize, table the aspects of SRG in the the changes to the SRG section in the certified staff handbook. No other changes to the secondary, elementary, athletic, or non-certified staff handbook. Do I have a second?
I would second the motion.
It's been seconded, but we'll open it up for discussion. Dan, did you have a question?
Yes, I have a question. So we're going back to what it was originally?
Correct.
No.
2023, it's been moved and seconded. You can represent
Okay,
that on your
that's
vote.
fine, that's fine.
And we can look at it, changing it in a working session, so. All right, it's been properly moved and seconded. All those in favor signified by aye.
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 Sorry, aye.
Opposed?
Aye,
Opposed?
or opposed, whatever I gotta say.
Motion carries 3-2. All right, next we have the technology user agreement approval. It does require a motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
So Heather, this is not, we updated this last year. She's up in the booth, I still see her. 2022, and it has not been changed, but we want to update it. We want to make sure you guys see it every year so that if you have questions or you think something needs to be looked at or different.
This
you
is the
can-
one we sign when our kids get the
Correct,
electronics.
exactly. Yep, that's exactly it.
Thank you.
So we
Is there
just
any
want, it's more awareness so that
Yeah.
you know every year you're approving this because parents sign off on it every year.
Yep. Is there any discussion? All right, if not, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the technology usage agreement.
Been properly moved. Do I have a second?
I'll second the motion.
Been properly moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right. Next, we have the exit interview recap, information only. Ms. Wallman will be here to talk with us through that.
So just for background, but she's coming up here, we started doing exit interviews about 5 years ago. We had a significant number of people leave right around COVID, but we wanted to find out kind of what the reasons were. So typically, Ms. Boffman, HR director, will talk to staff, and I also talk to them. Mine's a little bit more informal, just, what's next, how are things going, what do we do better, that kind of thing. She actually asked some very specific questions that we ask all of our exiting employees, whether they're certified or non-certified. So this is the report she has for you.
So the report I turned in showed that this past year, 17 of our staff members have left. 8 of those were certified, 6 support staff members, and 3 administrators. And it just kind of breaks down the different reasons as to why they left. And you can see I've also broken it out by the different years. The questions that I asked are the same 4 questions that we've asked since we've started. They're just very generalized questions. What is your reason for leaving? We have like 4 or 5 examples. We also have one called Other. So if they have something that they want to tell me, they can. We also ask them, of course, what do you like about your time here at I-35? What are some things that we can improve upon? Are there any other additional things that you want us to know? Those types of questions are what's asked, and I just let them speak freely. Do you have any questions?
Personal concerns, is that like health reasons or stuff like that, or like personal concerns as in they didn't really want to tell you why they were actually leaving?
Yes.
Okay.
Some of them flat out tell you
Fair
that
enough.
it's,
Yeah.
some of them flat out tell you that it's, a health concern either of themselves or a family member that they have to take care of, and they just, can't do both, obviously. Some of them are just not even going to tell you, and which is fine. Like I said, I just allow them to share what they are comfortable with sharing.
Okay, thank you.
Well, obviously, number one, the district board goals no longer align with personal goals. That's disappointing to see. Can you elaborate on that anything else? It's pretty straightforward, but I just
It's
wondered.
pretty straightforward. There were just some that come in and just kind of made comments about how over the last year, things have kind of shifted and changed from what was set as far as our district goals, not only what the district has as goals, but what our board is currently, done and what they're seeing as their goals. So that's kind of where they led me to.
Did they give any examples
as to
of what had changed for the goal?
just different ways that things are happening. Case in point, we've, reverted back to standards reference grading to a previous one. It's like they feel like that we're not moving things forward. We're constantly going back and forth and not progressing.
Alrighty, thank you.
I think, it'll be good to dive into this with Mr. Grandin and have, as part of our working session, get feedback to the board on some of the things we can, do differently and continue to, I guess, as our journey as new board members, either, communicate things better or, take a different approach. So I assume you'll be working with him on this and going through it. And
Absolutely.
I'd like to make sure we just action on this data so it just, isn't stale reports that we collect. So thank you for taking the time to do that.
You're welcome.
All right, next item we have is the school fees, it's the annual fees. I understand the state, yeah, go
School
ahead.
fees, these are obviously charges that we pass on to parents, so the board needs to approve those. The only changes that we're recommending are to the breakfast and lunch, and we actually, is Ms. Stroh here, we actually have a calculator and a process that they use. Do you want to explain that a little bit? And I hate to put you on the spot, but you know more about this than I do. Yeah, we just explain the process.
It's fine,
Yeah.
it looks like it's 10 cents.
Yeah, so the state will calculate, this is what we expect you to do. This is where we expect you to be. They'll give you like a threshold. Your student lunches should be here. Your adult lunches should be here. Breakfast, the same thing. So the only thing, I gotta get my glasses on. 10 cents was I would say the consensus of what the state was telling us. So we're like, okay, we look at milk, lunches, and breakfast. We don't want to get behind, but if we don't have to add, we don't want to. If we don't do it 10 cents this year and next year rolls around, oh my, look, we're way behind. I'd rather do a 10 cent this year than get behind. So that would be why that is. Now, you did notice, like Mrs. Dellinger said, the adult breakfast. Why didn't that stay the same, but the adult lunch stayed the same? Okay, so the difference being the state says they look at free and reduced. Reduced breakfast prices are 40 cents. So we have to have a difference of the student or breakfast difference. It has to be at least 40 cents, and we were not. So we adjusted it. So that's why that is the way it is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and adult lunch, the threshold is already there, so we have the difference already made. So we're good.
And that'll come out later, won't it?
Yes.
Yep, so the adult lunch
Yeah.
could change.
It could change if they so say,
Yeah, if
but right now, we're gonna
if
hold.
they tell us we have to, then we'll change
Yeah.
the adult lunch one.
And we'll bring that to you, but it doesn't impact students, so
Yeah.
it's not as significant.
So
These are
right now, it's
the
just a
students.
10 cent,
Right.
a 10 cent change.
And I think all the other fees, we did spell out a little bit on our technology because we're seeing a little bit more damage to our computers, our devices in the middle school, and so we want to make sure parents understand what the consequence of that decision could be. So we wanted to spell that out a little bit in a little bit more detail. So that's also. There's still no change. Right, no change, but we just want to make sure it's more articulated.
Any other questions?
Thanks, Angie.
No,
You're
ma'am.
welcome.
Thank you. All right, so there's no further discussion. I'll entertain a motion to approve the school fees.
I motion to approve the school fees.
It's been properly motioned. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
It's been properly moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, and next we have the garbage and pest control bids. There were bids that were added in the board packets. This is requiring action. Is there any discussion on the garbage and pest control bids?
Is there a reason why we didn't get any other bids back? I mean,
I wish I knew an answer. We do this every year. We
Yeah.
send it to 4 or 5 people. It's the same
Yeah.
thing when we bid projects for like concrete or we bid, I don't know if we're just far enough away or because people are so busy. I mean, Dan probably sees this more than we do, but with the different bid processes he uses, but we just occasionally will get 2. But I
Well, I
mean, all
see-
we can do is ask.
I
and
see
then-
the services down here, that's why I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. So no, I don't have an answer, other than I think people are busy. I think that we're probably minor in connect to what they're used to getting from
They
other
have
districts that are
established
bigger.
And they have
So-
established routes here. that
Exactly.
Other people probably don't,
Yeah.
but yeah. All right, is there any other discussion? All right, I'll entertain a motion to, on the garbage and pest control bids.
I will make a motion to approve the garbage and pest control bids.
Been properly motioned, do I have a second?
I'll second it.
All right, been properly moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right. Couple key dates here is the next board meeting, July 22nd, 2024. And then
You guys have a
we have
work
a
session
working
when?
session that's not on here. That is
July
on
16th.
July 16th.
Okay.
So,
6 to 9.
6 to 9.
Okay.
So, outside that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Been properly moved to adjourn. Do I have a second?
I will second.
Been properly moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we are adjourned.